Hi, if you're intimidated by this video's runtime, I actually put some timestamps down below. You can watch it in parts. I did it special for you. I will be sweaty. It is July and I cannot have the AC on because of background noise, so I will be sweaty. Also, I filmed it over a couple weeks, so if my hair gets longer, I get thinner. Time is what? Time happened. And last and most important thing to get out of the way, I'm going to put Omori's actual content warning up here now because all of this applies to this video as well. And as you can see from the video runtime, these topics will not just be brushed over, they're going to be deeply delved into, and the game is also going to be completely spoiled. I just want to make that clear to any person who may have a history with them and wants to steer clear of this kind of media. It's gonna get a little rough. I suspect after hearing that, many people will continue watching and many will stop watching for the exact same reason. We all cope differently. I am no stranger to these topics. This video is actually very hard for me to make because of all the feelings it brought up, and the game was also hard to play. To do a little to contextualize that, I want to start by talking about November 2018. This was the month I entered one of the deepest depressions of my entire life. I had been that low before, but this is the first time it happened to that extent since I had gotten sober about 1 year prior. I no longer had the numbing agent I had so heavily relied upon previously, albeit one that hurt me far more than it helped me. I became bedridden. I was towards the end of a semester in my computer science program and I failed to go to the vast majority of my classes for weeks. I only managed to pass because I was lucky enough to have done well up to that point. As far as interacting with friends and loved ones goes, I had gotten rid of my social media where most people at the time would communicate with me, and typing a text message seemed like a massive, insurmountable task. Eventually, a really great friend to me, Matt, texted me asking if I was okay. He said that no one had heard from me in a really long time, and I didn't need to tell him what was wrong, but he just wanted to hear that I was okay in some sense of the word. I was brought to tears by this. My brain had convinced me no one noticed my absence or cared about me. I had no reason to believe this in the first place, but I remember feeling like this text message was a direct contradiction to those thoughts and feelings that had consumed my brain for weeks. It took me hours to actually respond, but when I finally did, I told him that I was okay, but my depression was not manageable at the moment. Because of my history, I knew his concern on some level was suicide. But through all of this, I never explicitly wanted to kill myself. I kept wishing to fall asleep and not wake up, and the thought of it as an option comforted me. My brain could be such a hostile place and one I was trapped with. But I had no plan for suicide. No concrete list of steps I'd settled on to end my life. And I'd crossed that threshold before this particular bout of depression. I've had trips to the psych ward, I've been placed on suicide watch, but I didn't have to do that this time. Something inside me was different. And by the end of this video, with the help of this game, I'll be able to explain why my past was so different from my present and what steps led me there. Part 1. Building a World. Omori is deeply upsetting, funny, charming, and is able to say so much using some of the most potent imagery and characterization I've ever seen in a video game. Every detail in this game is building to something huge and intensely impactful. I can safely say no game has made me feel how Omori did. In short, after finishing it, it ruined my fucking day. It ruined the whole thing, the entire day. I was left with a lasting feeling at the end. The reality of what is happening is revealed to the player in stages, so I will be structuring this video to reveal things in stages as well. I think that really adds to its effectiveness. Though what I will state right off the bat is this is about dealing with emotional trauma, and the worlds and realities an individual might construct to cope with these traumas. In fact, that is where a lot of the story takes place, and where it begins. The intro and beginning will need to cover a lot to properly set up what is to come, though I will be leaving out things that don't apply to the points I'm making. I need to keep the runtime of this video somewhat reasonable. Great work, Jer. Cue the Growly Bear intro thing. I don't know who I'm talking to. I edit this. Omori opens with a brief animation featuring the words, "Everything is going to be okay," before dumping the player into an area called White Space. Does everything in its power to drive a sense of safe but unsettling repetition into the player. You only have so many actions you can perform. You can look at your journal in your computer, which essentially says the same thing every day. Look at a light bulb that shines with what appears to be a black light. Look at a box of tissues that says you use it to dry your tears. Look through a sketchbook with some disturbing and hard hard to place imagery. Walk in any direction going north, south, east, or west, and it will result in going to the same room again. Getting caught by these disembodied hands will result in them bringing you to the same room again. Or talking to the cat who asked the very relevant question, waiting for something to happen? Like, yes! I fucking am! This is a massive subversion for a starting area. What to do next is not made clear to the player at all, and it is not exciting by design. Most starting areas go out of their way to move players along, make sure they don't get stuck, and keep their attention. I feel like many people didn't make it past the beginning of this game for that reason. In fact, it looks like only about 60% of people made it past the intro according to the Steam achievements. This area is borderline claustrophobic, given how technically endless it is, while still only being one room. You feel trapped and confused, though not in any real danger at all. As boring as it is, nothing here seems capable of actually hurting you. After looking at your sketchbook, you hear something fall. If you zigzag around the repeating rooms, you can find a knife. The knife is incredibly important going forward and will come up time and time again. In a way, it represents a connection to the real world. After you find it, you can progress through a door you previously couldn't pass through, entering a room with a very over-the-top, childlike color scheme. It's striking coming from a room in only black and white. You meet up with your friends and some differences between you and them become immediately apparent. Firstly, even out here, Omori is basically just black and white, while your friends are a kind of unnatural purple hue like they'd been dipped in a vat of childhood nostalgia. Almost like he belongs in white space, but not out here. Second, you realize Omori is a silent protagonist, nowhere near the energy level of the others. The three friends you meet with, Aubrey, Hiro, and Kel, say that another two friends, Marie and Basil, are waiting for them to hang out, and at this point I was entirely overwhelmed because I'm terrible at remembering the names of characters, and there seem to be so many main characters right off the rip. But they are so well fleshed out that this was very quickly not a problem. You leave the room and the snake gives you an allowance of clams. Snake clams. Exiting the over-the-top childish theme is continued when you see the whole area was inside a huge stump with a rainbow on top of it. This little intro bit does a great job of giving some insight into the character dynamics using very little actual time. Kel is shown to be the immature one picking on Aubrey, Hiro is the level-headed mature one trying to quell situations, and Aubrey seems to be pretty well-meaning but in a state of constant annoyance thanks to Kel, who took her stuffed toy away, which you naturally find inside a watermelon and return to her. Anyway, naturally, the first thing I wanted to do is try to find the wrong way to go first. Find any secrets I can before progressing the main story. Every direction from this stump, however, is blocked. And what's interesting is this is done with the player character's fears. One side has a spider web, one side has water, and one side has a tall ladder. It doesn't resort to invisible walls or require gadgets or have unclimbable mountains. It's the character's own refusal that won't allow you to go in most directions. This is something that's going to repeat a lot throughout this game, using gameplay to flesh out characters. We both learn that there are directions that we can't head yet, and Omori has a fear of these things. We arrive at the location that the game intended for us to go, the playground, and meet Basil and Marie. Basil wears a flower crown and gives off a vibe of happy innocence. Marie seems to be mature in a similar way to Hiro. Some flirting implies they may be a couple. After looking through a photo album of pictures filled with the group of friends, you can explore around this area and do a small quest, where you play hide and seek with various fantasy creatures and characters. But your main goal is to go to Basil's house. Marie stays at the picnic blanket and will throughout the vast majority of the game. She can give you guidance on where to go for certain missions, has food to heal your party, and most importantly, you need her picnic basket to save. She serves as a hub of sorts, offering emotional support along with filling vital roles within the game's mechanics. She represents and is relegated to safety. After hide and go seek, you realize Basil is still missing and see he's been kidnapped. You have to fight a character named Boss to get him back. This is our introduction to the battle system. It becomes immediately apparent when scrolling through the menus that this includes the remarkably unique mechanic of controlling people's emotions during a battle. The emotions assigned to each character also fit each character. Obviously, Kel can make people mad, Omori makes them sad, and Aubrey makes them happy. Hiro is a healer that appears to heal using food. The game does not make it clear which emotions do what at this point though, which is actually a brilliant move. If you're anything like me, you'll assume happy is the good emotion emotion and start making your party happy, assuming this is having some positive effect. This will be an especially important detail when we discuss how this system actually works. This fight also exemplifies some other ways this world seems to be an idealized and padded type of place. One of the type of items you'll be collecting is snacks, and another toys, as can be seen from the fight menu. Also, when a player reaches 0 HP, they become toast, a euphemism that gives the implication that death isn't really a thing in this world, at least not for the important characters. It should also be noted that this is the first time we see the Omori did not succumb message, when every other character takes enough damage to have their HP completely drained, but Omori maintains 1 HP. Next, you head towards Basil's house and encounter another combat scenario where you fight a Sprout Mole. The emotion system begins to get some elaboration here when Hero points out that the Sprout Mole is angry and will take and deal more damage. So now the player knows there seems to be some advantages and disadvantages to each emotion. Additionally, this lines up with the actual emotion of anger, taking and dealing more damage. Anger can get you to get things done, do things you otherwise wouldn't have, whether they be good or bad. But anger is also a very vulnerable state, one typically built on a foundation of sadness or anxiety, making you more susceptible to Sprout Mole attacks. You continue on the path and Basil tells you the meaning of each of the different flowers in his garden, pointing out which flower reminds him of which friend. You continue to encounter Sprout Moles and learn the advantages and disadvantages to each emotion. The system goes one step further though and makes some emotions strong against other emotions. Happy is strong against angry, sad is strong against happy, and angry is strong against sad. I love how they did this. This is another strong theme in this game that is very well demonstrated through gameplay: the importance of feeling. Many people get caught in the reductive trap of happy being good and sad or angry being bad, but the truth is much more complex than that, which is why it was such a good creative choice to start the player in a battle not knowing this, because they are likely to gravitate towards just making their party happy and assuming the other emotions are typically to be used on enemies. This idea is compounded by the fact that Boss becomes angry during the fight, which is weak to happy, resulting in the player doing more damage and seemingly confirming their suspicions. But finding out this assumption is incorrect and there's actually more depth to be found is an effective way to shine a light on how we tend to assume this reductive view of emotion by default. The truth is sadness and anger have their place, and are feelings that should be felt at times. You shouldn't just suppress everything you feel that we deem a negative emotion. They have a purpose and are sometimes a necessary pathway for arriving back at happy. On this walk to Basil's house, you also encounter Marie on a picnic blanket in a different location, setting the precedent that she will inexplicably show up places where it's convenient for players to save and heal, highlighting the non-reality video game-ness of this world, and also the vital importance of Marie in it. Before making it to Basil's place, we are introduced to the last element of the battle system tutorial: follow-ups. These are actions that can be performed after an attack that vary from character to character. For example, Kel can choose to pass a ball to one of his friends. Depending on who he passes it to, something different happens. The results are dependent on how the characters would interact with each other. If he passes to Hero, his brother, they work together and deal damage to all foes. If he passes to Omori, Omori doesn't catch it and he takes damage and assumes the sad status effect. This really well exemplifies the dynamic between Kel and the much less energetic Omori. The interesting thing that should be noted here is that Omori is the only friend who doesn't involve the others in all of his follow-ups. In fact, they are only included in one follow-up, the Release Energy Ultimate Attack. His other two are Attack Again and the Strange Trip option, increasing the separation from the rest of his friends and raising more questions about why this is the case. Another thing you might pick up on is the fact that Omori is the only one that attacks with a real-world weapon, the ever-important knife. Every other character attacks with weapons like rubber balls or stuffed toys. This is possibly the most unsettling of the differences so far. It's violent, and knives are typically portrayed as the weapon of a creepy horror movie villain. Given how emotionless and removed Omori seems to be, this is exactly the vibe it gives off with him as well. Swords are for heroes, knives are for villains. But he seems harmless enough in every other way so far. Eventually, you make your way all the way to Basil's house and return to the photo album. After Aubrey and Kel have another fight, they end up knocking some of the pictures out and they have to put it back together. This is again used as a tool to convey some of the history of the friends to you. After getting the pictures back in place, another photo falls out of the the album, and the tone takes a sharp turn. Basil picks it up and doesn't recognize it. We are introduced to the first visual darkness of the game. Basil's eyes turn red. He says Marie's name. You see a photo of a broken violin, and you cut back to white space, cutting the player and Omori off from whatever presumably horrifying thing happened next. Back to the safe monotony of white space, and back to not knowing what you are supposed to do next. The old method of searching for the knife no longer works. You have the knife, and everything else seems to be the same aside from a new, simple yet disturbing picture in your sketchbook. Eventually, I got frustrated and paused. It was at this point I noticed the stab option and read in the pause menu. It seemed like it couldn't have possibly been there before. I pressed it, not sure what would happen, and Omori stabbed himself. Again, the knife was the only way to make it out. It's like the only way Omori can be put in danger in this space is by doing it to himself. You flash to a boy sleeping in his room, and the game asks you to name him. Being a narcissist, I named him Jer because no one in this game was named after me so far, and I thought that was kinda bullshit. That's what we will be calling him for the rest of the game, and what you should call him in your game. You wake up and navigate around the house. It becomes increasingly apparent that this is a significantly more realistic and grounded world than the one you began in. This must be the real world. It's just a normal house and a very jarring setting change. Jer appears to be home alone and checks his answering machine to find a message from his mom. The message in the boxes around the house reveal they will soon be moving. His friend Kel has been trying to get in touch with him, a friend by the same name as one of the characters in what now seems to be a dream world. We also find a picnic basket at which to save, but no Marie. This is the first time we see one on its own like this. You can only explore the upstairs for now, as Jer seems afraid to go down the stairs. And your only option is to go back to sleep. However, Jer is awoken by hunger and has to go to the kitchen. This is where the world breaks from the grounded vibe it had given off before, except not in the cute, fantastical way the other world was largely based in. This feels much darker and based in our protagonist's fear. There's a red glow from outside. The stairs stretch out in front of him and seem endless, implying he shares the same fear of heights as Omori, or at the very least, of this staircase in particular. Going down, the same dark aesthetic takes over as the one that popped up in the last scene with Basil, this time with dark hands reaching all around the character, and lying on the staircase is once again the knife. All of these things do a great job of confirming the direct connection between Omori and Jer in just the first 5 minutes of playing as Jer. You are attacked by the extremely disturbing something. The simplicity of a lot of this art is what makes it so unsettling. It leaves a lot to the imagination. It feels like it is somehow nebulous, and yet also implies a greater level of unseen detail. This clashes with the lighter elements of the world, resulting in it seemingly reaching into the cutesy world even when it is not present, and adding some elements of that being unsettling as well, just by knowing this exists at all. In the same way an innocent song on a music box in a haunted house has the effect of being profoundly creepy. You attack something with the knife, but it does nothing. Jer also enters an emotional state of afraid, which hasn't been seen or even mentioned up to this point. It was nowhere in the tutorial or emotional diagram. After attacking a bit to no avail, Jer learns to, or is seemingly taught by something to, calm the fuck down and take a deep breath. This removes the afraid effect and ends the fight immediately. The battle is with Jer's own fear. His emotional state was the enemy, and not something to be manipulated in order to defeat an enemy. Afterward, the house returns to normal, implying everything supernatural here occurred strictly in the character's mind. If you've ever had an anxiety or panic attack, this vague something may be familiar. It isn't always super clear where the source of the fear is really coming from. It just feels like something and everything. Calming down often reveals the threat you were so afraid of was one invented by you. Also, this showed something seems to be empathetic towards Jer, despite being the source of his terror, and it demonstrates how fear is what necessitates learning to calm down. It can be very common for those with some of the most mental health problems to have the greatest degree of emotional intelligence and coping mechanisms. Not to toot my own horn or anything. It's just a joke. Everyone gets afraid. Everyone gets insecure. Everyone gets sad. But we tend to assign thresholds to when people should get help for these things. Those that are the most mentally ill or don't hide it are the ones that receive treatment and move forward. Everyone goes in for physicals. Everyone goes to the doctor. But not everyone has the luxury of doing the same for their mental health. You can now explore the downstairs of the house and go to the kitchen. Jer picks up yet another knife to have his steak, eats it, and gets sick. The final event to happen in this section is a knocking at the door. Jer goes to check, and it's Marie. She says she forgot her keys. He starts to open the door if you, the player, chooses to do so, and a flash of a very creepy monster is shown so quickly I had to go frame by frame to see what it actually looked like. He slams the door shut. This feels super unusual. Marie had been such a bastion of safety and guidance thus far. This left me wondering, why was this such an unnerving experience? When she first came to the door, I felt relieved. Someone from the happy, vibrant world was coming to visit in the one that had either been terrifying or ordinary up until now. All that is left to do is go back to sleep and return to the safety of white space. Part 2. Enjoying the escape. When you arrive, everything is once again the same, except your journal on your computer has been replaced by a game of hangman, one where the keys that represent the different letters have hints as to where they can be found. After examining this, a map falls nearby and you can see the full dream world there is to explore. Next, you can exit to the dream world again and begin your first real day there. You go to the start room again, talk to your friends again, take your allowance from the snake again, and exit the rainbow stump again. Basil is still missing and more of the world must be explored. Immediately, you see one of the missing keys with what appears to be bloody footprints leading up to it, as if someone wounded had left it there for you to find. After picking it up, you are required to go see Marie. Everything feels so much happier, and this is my first experience, although minor, of feeling relieved returning to the dream world. There were so many things about the real world that felt so wrong, and this dream world is a welcome escape for the player as well as Jer. It's so much more open, so much more to experience. Having it be the thing you experience before the real world was a brilliant decision. It's much more jarring to go from fantastical to reality than vice versa in a medium like this. You expect the fantastical. For now, I headed right back to Basil's house. Arriving, you briefly see the shadow creature before it disappears and no sign of Basil. The group decides to go to the vast forest, the only location without a fear for our protagonist to overcome to enter. I will also start covering parts of the game in less depth starting here. Much of it is either side content or battles, or things that otherwise don't necessarily directly relate to the main themes I'll be discussing, so I don't need to go step by step like I have been up to this point. You're able to experiment more with the battle system here and have fights against weak enemies like bunnies. You know, the classic enemy of the people. Bunnies. Besides just the skills, you can start using snacks to heal, drinks to restore juice, used for special attacks, and toys to attack, although I didn't use toys quite yet. Also, you will notice that all items are located inside watermelons. That wasn't just a silly one-off thing in the beginning. This seems to be a reference to Aubrey's love for watermelon, as shown in the photo album. Almost like this world had a designer. After searching the forest to no avail, Marie suggests you climb to the very tall ladder Omori was afraid of at the beginning of the game and check there. Omori's friends acknowledge his fear of heights, but are very encouraging. This is the beginning of Omori overcoming his fears. I'm also afraid of heights, and they say the best way to get over a fear is exposure to that fear. So I went cliff jumping and had the life-changing revelation that I am also afraid of falling. Anecdotes aside, that ladder is your next objective. First though, you are presented with a side quest to find Burley's, the kid from the playground's, ball. The side quests generally reward you with stuff to improve your combat and allow you to explore the world more thoroughly, but don't typically directly relate to the game's ideas, outside of extending the time spent in the dream world and outside of the real one, which is a clever way of fitting the idea of extending the escape in, and they make exploration more satisfying, the objective of any set of side quests. But they also carry a lot of the world's charm and sense of humor. Much of the smaller details in this world can be very funny, and just playing the main quest would leave you with a fraction of that side of this game's writing. You return to the ladder now, and the familiar dark hands surround Omori briefly before dissipating and text appearing on screen that just says, "You are no longer afraid of heights." This is drastically different from the experience of Jer going down the infinite stairs, being surrounded by the hands for significantly longer, getting caught by them, having to face something, and learning to calm down in the face of all of this. The juxtaposition of these two events highlights the naivety of the dream world. Being afraid of heights doesn't just go away with the slightest coating of bravery. Just look at what happened with me and cliff jumping, and my coating of bravery was as thick as I am. Oh my god, just the worst line. But it is becoming more and more clear that this dream world abides by the rules that Jer, or his creation Omori, wants. It is his idealized reality, so when he chooses not to be afraid, he is not afraid. They climb the ladder, Kel drops his pet rock Hector, and is very upset. This results in another side mission, the resolution of which is a good way to showcase the humor in these missions. I didn't encounter it until much later, so I'll have to shoot forward. You finally find Hector after digging him up in an optional minigame area. He now has a family and is much more mature than 2 days ago. His son decides he'd like to go with Kel to explore the world, and there is a heartfelt scene amongst rocks as Hector comes to term with this being the best course of action for Hector Jr. It's very silly and I'm into it. But back to the ladder. You get to the top and arrive at the Otherworld campsite. It appears you've climbed nearly to space or all the way to space, I'm not really sure. The campsite might be the most endearing location in the game for me. You can walk around and talk to various NPCs, like this one who is the world's smallest centaur and has hyper-specific rewards all over their house to prove it. It's just a fun little centaur thing. The Otherworld campsite also has some more side missions scattered throughout, and the first mention of an important upcoming character, Sweetheart, when you meet a superfan that appears to be unhealthily obsessed in a parasocial relationship with this celebrity. Eventually you end up in the intended location for the main story, where you talk to space pirates. This makes sense. The existence of aliens, combined with me wanting it to be true, necessitates the existence of space pirates. You find out their leader, formerly known as Captain Spaceboy, just got dumped by the aforementioned Sweetheart, will no longer leave his bed, and is making everyone call him Space Boyfriend now, which is objectively funny. The mission in this part revolves around finding Space Boyfriend's mixtape that is supposed to cheer him up. You have to search through a junkyard to find it. You basically just navigate your way through, fighting enemies and collecting items. However, something new is introduced with the ability to tag other teammates. Each party member has a different ability when they are tagged and leading the party. And in the spirit of every other major gameplay mechanic, match the personality of that character. Omori cuts through stuff with his knife, Aubrey smashes stuff with her bat, Kel throws balls at stuff from a distance, and Hero charms characters that must be smooth-talked. All of these abilities match the type of skills they learn over the course of the game. Each character has 2 characteristics that determine all skills they can develop: their emotion, or healing in Hero's case, and their actual skill. Omori is a sad stabby boy, for example, and Aubrey is a happy Batgirl. Well, not like a Batgirl. She has a bat. This ties in so well with the battle system because it adds a little bit of its same character flavor to the encounters outside of combat. And as simple as it may be, it adds a little gameplay element. Playing through Omori, it becomes more and more apparent that the gameplay is intended to be less of a challenge and more of a vehicle to deliver the story and get the player attached to these characters. This isn't to say the gameplay is boring, but its difficulty is not what makes the game so compelling. It uses it to deliver story elements in a way that only video games can. After getting the special mixtape, you return to Space Boyfriend with it, and Kel blasts it in the boombox. It wakes up Space Boyfriend, and he is furious. After Aubrey calls him Space Ex-Boyfriend, which is objectively funny, a fight begins. Throughout this fight, Space Ex-Boyfriend becomes angrier and angrier, so the player must plan their strategy around dealing with this emotion, as at some point he becomes so angry he cannot be swayed to any other emotion. This is an interesting mechanic because in battles up to this point you could typically manipulate both party members and enemies' emotions to whatever you wanted. But this fight occurs on Space Ex-Boyfriend's terms in respect to how emotions are used. I don't know why Aubrey is angry here, probably because I'm an idiot, but the best strategy is to make your heavy hitters happy, like Omori is, as that is strong against anger. It is much harder to overcome anger if you become angry along with your opponent. Sound familiar? Have you ever returned anger to someone who was angry with you? How did it go? Bad? When will you learn to take simple criticism, Patricia? I miss you. Are you watching? The point is that matching anger with anger is not effective, and that's a neat little lesson driven home by this fight. After defeating him, he returns to a much more rational state of mind and doesn't seem to know what happened during the fight, apologizing to the party. A kind of hyperbolic version of calming down after you get upset and realizing you didn't mean the thing you said. He acknowledges that his anger was misplaced anger stemming from his breakup with Sweetheart, and returns to being called Captain Spaceboy. The kids are remarkably forgiving, continuing with the theme that you can't fight anger with anger. The kids are just happy he's feeling better, and this leads to the situation being diffused rather than prolonged. He is now the captain of the space pirates again, the day is saved, and a lesson is learned. But still no sign of Basil anywhere. You do find another key for the Hangman game though, and apparently one of the correct ones. Given a message comes up after that says 9 keys are left. There's also a message saying all the character follow-ups have improved, basically becoming more powerful while maintaining their thematic ties to the characters. Upon exiting Otherworld, a shadow Basil is seen walking into the other area that can be accessed from the ladder. You follow him, and Omori's friends disappear. This area is filled with the remnants of memories with Basil, birthday parties, times at the beach, and just every day hanging out, all filled with quotes that give the impression of perfect moments in time. Ethereal music plays in the background while each memory disappears after a moment of viewing it, giving the impression these memories are both far away emotionally and in time. Eventually you follow Shadow Basil all the way to a barn, the entrance of which has the glowing red light we saw earlier at Jer's house. You proceed in and then follow Basil through a picture into a black and white space with scribbled out sheet music at the end. The shadow figure appears again, and once again an image flashes so fast I had to go frame by frame to see what it was. Basil holding a photograph. Then back to white space, from what was seemingly a black space. Omori once again stabs himself, and thus ends the first full day in the dream world. Part 3. Reality hurts. We now retake control of Jer back in the real world, during the daytime this time. Kel is at the door, and you have the option to open it or not. It should be noted that not opening it is both super unlikely for a player to do, like why would you not, why? And would result in a wildly different rest of the game, but we will talk about that later. Kel seems shocked that you actually answered and came out, which makes sense given the message Jer got from his mom earlier on the answering machine. It had been established Jer was avoiding him, which would have made the player actions feel divergent from what Jer would have done if it weren't for what appeared to be a crack in the dream world with Basil disappearing. His escape has gotten a little less safe, and that may make him more inclined to engage with the real world. Kel joins your party and you proceed to explore the town. The real Kel gets a bit of character development here. It's always a strange feeling in media when you've gotten to know a fake or concocted version of a character and then meet the real one, like Mad-Eye Moody in Harry Potter. When the real Moody appears, you have no idea how he would actually act, how accurate was the copy. So the game wastes no time in establishing Kel as a similar but definitely older and slightly more mature version of what he was in the dream world. He has a lot less of the childlike immaturity, but still maintains a vibe of positivity and excitement you might associate with a child. You know, adults, how you cry now? This interaction he has at the park with an artist working on a drawing demonstrates this perfectly. He is fucking psyched about their drawing, in a way they seem to have not experienced before. He's actually kind of weirding them out a little. He even offers them money for it. This one interaction sums up real-world Kel really well and is also super endearing. He never strayed from the vibe I got from him here for the rest of the game. This town is full of interactions like this. People to talk to, things to examine, all of which either teach you about the world or give you hints as to the character's past. But none of it even comes close to explaining what is happening. We are still in a stage of every answer giving rise to two more questions like a plot hydra. What it does answer is where a lot of the stuff in the dream world came from. Sweetheart and Captain Spaceboy both come from media, comics, and movies. You also learn Hero is away at medical school, which explains his healing moves in the dream world. And Kel wants to buy him a gift for when he gets home. He decides on a cookbook because Hero enjoys cooking. And with that, we have explained 2 of 3 of his battle and gameplay mechanics. And then we can be the judge of whether or not he's charming. Eventually, you encounter Aubrey and her new group of friends. They are bullying Basil, so instantly it becomes apparent the group dynamics have changed. And Aubrey isn't even friends with the rest of them anymore. Kel becomes immediately mad and basically speaks what the player's thoughts likely are, pointing out that they used to be friends and it's just straight fucked up to bully Basil, who appears to be the most innocent character yet created. It's also established Jer has barely left his house in 3 or 4 years, implying the dream world version of his friends are 3 or 4 years younger than their real world counterparts, and that seems to be the time he's trying to recapture. Kel and Jer end up fighting Aubrey. Immediately attention is drawn to the fact that Jer uses a knife to fight. I pointed out earlier, Omori is the only one with a real-world weapon in the dream world, and the same holds true for his real-world counterpart. He attacks once and everyone was like, what the actual fuck, Jer? Was that a knife? You literally can't just stab people. Aubrey is okay, but her and her friends leave, and you check to see if Basil is okay. He also seems super surprised to see Jer and just wants you guys to walk him home. You bring him to his door, but before leaving, he tells you that Aubrey has stolen his photo album. It seems to be just as important to real-world Basil as it was was to Dreamworld Basil. You promised to recover it for him. At this point, I decided to more thoroughly exploring the town, knowing that if I progressed the main story too much, I'd likely be sucked back into the dream world without a chance to see all of Fairway Town. There were still so many places I hadn't been. One of the first places of note was the Other Mart, a large Walmart type store. At one end is a pharmacy, and symmetrically at the other end, a candy store. I like how they did this because first aid items from the pharmacy are what can be used to heal in the real world. The candy sold at the candy shop is completely useless. Another way the game gives the player a genuine sense of juxtaposition between the fantastical and the real world. The real world does really feel real as a result of this. It still absolutely maintains the charm of the game, but feels boring in many ways. Painfully real against the backdrop of the dream world, a world designed to be amazing and idealized. They absolutely went out of their way to take every aspect of the dream world and make a real world, everyday, mundane explanation of where it came from. Additionally, the lady that runs the candy store bears a striking resemblance to Sweetheart. We will talk more about her later though. Kel and Jer then go to the park to try to figure out where Aubrey is. They end up fighting some kids for information and win, but unlike the dream world, this has no real effect. The actual way you end up finding out who to talk to about Aubrey's location is by threatening to tell everyone the character you are fighting, Angel, wets the bed. A much more realistic way of getting information out of a child. I don't know why I said it like I do that. You know how that's the easiest way to get information out of a child. You know how we all do that. But it kind of highlights in actuality how bizarre it would be to resolve all conflict through combat. He points you in the direction of a kid who calls himself the Maverick. Kel doesn't appear to take him seriously at all and still refers to him as Michael. At this point, I return to exploring the town again. I looked through all the nooks as well as the crannies and was knocking on people's doors as some of them answer. What was interesting to me is they will actually give you side quests, but they are always something comparably mundane, like picking up a prescription for an old lady. None of them have much in the way of tangible rewards. You mostly get the ability to enter their house and learn more about the neighborhood, which does really give everything a more complete feel, but material rewards are fewer and farther between in general than in the dream world. The only real way you can consistently collect money here is by cleaning up piles of trash, a stark contrast from having a talking snake give you an allowance of clams. You also never end up with so much money you don't have to be remotely careful how to spend it, like what frequently happens in the dream world. So it means a lot if you decide to purchase something or donate to a homeless person. Eventually you track down the Maverick outside of this water fountain. He calls Kel his arch nemesis and just overacts in a very childish way. Kel still doesn't take him seriously and keeps trying to keep him on point. We need to find Aubrey. Also, he keeps calling him Michael and he fucking hates that. He challenges Jer and Kel to a fight and it's super clear Kel thinks this is a waste of time. You win the fight and embarrass him in front of the girls he paid to be there. It's not me roasting a fictional child character. He paid girls to be there. He then decides the only way he'll tell you where Aubrey is if Kel calls him Maverick, so Kel decides to try talking to someone else. Again, the fighting achieved nothing. They go to talk to two more of Aubrey's friends, Kim and Vance, at the candy store. They apparently have a sweet tooth, so Kel tries to bribe them with a big bag of candy, which they clearly really want, then they too inexplicably decide to fight you. I would also like to take a moment to point out that Jer does not have control over everyone's emotions the same way Omori does in the dream world. He is not the architect of this world, and subsequently, more things are just out of his hands. You win the fight, and then they tell you Aubrey is at the church, a kind of reverse of the other two situations. You have a non-violent way to negotiate, they decide to fight for no reason, and then winning the fight triggers them giving you the info. Next, you head to the church to confront Aubrey. Kel points out that Marie would be disappointed in Aubrey, and Aubrey says Marie is dead. This is a massive turning point in the player's understanding of this story. We are finally starting to contextualize some of what we've seen up to this point. In the dream world Jer escapes to, Marie is alive and all of the friends are together, neither of which are true in the real world. It is also an incredibly effective choice to have Marie be the save point. If you've ever lost a loved one, you know this feeling, the denial feeling. Like they must still be alive, it doesn't feel real. Like if you text them, they'll respond. You know why logically this isn't the case, but you so badly want to go back to the point where it was, and maybe do something differently, something that could have prevented this. I've lost multiple family members to suicide, and I'm also a recovering addict, and I've had people in my recovery programs relapse and die. For me, this brought to mind the memory of a recent death of a friend. He was someone from my outpatient rehab, and I would give him rides there and to AA meetings. I felt somewhat involved in the beginning of his recovery process, making sure he went to the things he needed to go to. Then, when outpatient rehab ended, we kind of went our separate ways. I went back to doing stand-up comedy, and he went back to his world. We kept in touch every now and again, but we really didn't see each other much at all. And then at a certain point, I hadn't spoken to him for months. One day, I saw a bunch of RIP posts on his Facebook page. I still don't fully know how he died, but it was drug and alcohol related. I immediately thought of those months I hadn't reached out, all that time that I felt like I could have been helping him. That had I sent a single text message, that never would have happened. And I know there's thousands of other factors in someone's life, and I was just a tiny one. But I genuinely felt if I could go back to a time before it happened, that I could have prevented it, and that I didn't, and I let it happen. And that's a feeling that may not be rational or accurate in any way, but they are extraordinarily common feelings. If I could go back and send him a text, hey, you want to go to an AA meeting? Hey, how's it going? But anything. Just reach out. In my head, that would have prevented it. And I know in reality, it wouldn't have made a dent. But that's how you feel. This idea of having that person who passed away be the save point, be the place at which you can always return to, always go back to them, and then try everything differently knowing what you know now. It brought me to tears. It clicked. It makes sense. Jared did this because he wants to be able to do this with his sister. To just go back to that last moment he saw her. To save that moment in time forever and fix whatever happened. Fix that lack of control feeling that comes with the worst case scenario having already occurred. It is unclear how she died, but I immediately got the sense it was something along these lines. Between this detail and the suicide and mental health warning at the beginning of the game, I've never seen a game show so much about grief in such a subtle way that many may not have picked up on it. It is now revealed that the bitterness Aubrey feels comes from the fact that the group of friends weren't really there for her when it happened. They were children. They didn't know how to handle something like this. These are incredibly complex emotions of grief, loss, and guilt that cause these friends to become distant from one another. Aubrey resents the rest of the group for that. She needed them there and they weren't. Kel continues to demand the photo album back and starts to cause a scene while Aubrey accuses Kel of thinking he's the good guy and she's the bully. She then challenges you to a fight in a church. This may seem like a horrible place to fight, but in my opinion, church is actually one of the more underrated Smash maps. It's so fucking stupid. As you fight, the churchgoers begin to criticize Aubrey, mocking her clothes, calling her uncivilized, basically emphasizing how many people see Aubrey, what she has to deal with when it comes to her public perception. This, combined with the explanation of why she's been so shitty, while not excusing her behavior, gives you your first bit of empathy for Aubrey. Up to this point, the player was likely just mad at her for bullying Basil. When pointing out the good guy, bad guy dichotomy with Kel, in a way it was like she was really talking to the player, as they may have already decided she was the bad guy. But understanding people beyond their actions, or the result of their actions, is a key point to this game. It comes up time and time again and will become more important as the story progresses. Her actions were still shitty, but the player has an opportunity to begin to understand, and understanding is the only way to resolve. Aubrey decides it's not worth fighting, and the churchgoers get a few more awful jabs in at her before she leaves. Kel then expresses his first bit of sympathy for Aubrey, again echoing what the player is likely feeling, and what I felt. Following this, you have the opportunity to go to the graveyard behind the church, and back there is, of course, Marie's grave, highlighted by a ray of sunshine. Just behind her grave is a flower, and just like Basil loves to point out, it has a meaning. It's a white orchid, and it means my thoughts will follow you into your dreams, which holds a lot of meaning given how much of this game has literally taken place in a dream world seemingly constructed to represent a time before Marie's death. Kel then begins talking about his brother Hero's reaction to the death of who seemed to be his girlfriend. He entered a depression, abandoning the things he used to enjoy. Based on previous flashbacks or photos in the game, it seems like she was intertwined in everything he did, like cooking with him. His view of his entire life must have been tainted by her absence. Everything he went to do reminded him she is not there doing it with him. This also represents a line in the sand for Jer, when Hiro would cook and when he gave up on that. This is why there's such a large emphasis on his cooking in combat in the dream world. It's yet another thing shattered by her death, and its presence reminds him of a time before it. If Hiro is cooking, things are still okay. Kel then talks about a specific memory when he was trying to console Hiro, but Hiro ultimately just lashed out, saying hurtful things to Kel. This felt very familiar, the anger. As I've already touched on briefly a couple times up to this point, anger always comes from a different emotion. It never occurs on its own. It can always be attributed to sadness or fear or even empathy for another person feeling those things. It's a form of retaliation and often occurs when you can't process those emotions in a clear-cut way, or when something can still be done about the problem causing those negative emotions. This is why it occurs so often with grief, and specifically with suicide and overdoses. It's so hard to process the idea that someone would be the cause of their own death. They killed themselves. This makes the target of your emotion such a difficult thing to understand, and oftentimes results in anger. Anger that has no clear place to go. Reading this part further confirmed my suspicion that this was a suicide. I realized that this was what Hiro was mourning. This explains why he felt what he felt. Leaving the church, you see Aubrey throw the photo album away and take it from the trash. You go to return it to Basil and his caretaker answers the door. Basil seems excited that you found the photo album, and his caretaker invites Kel and Jer in for dinner. At this point, you get another chance to look through photos from the character's past. The placements of when you can look at these photo albums in the game are done very strategically. This happened directly after the revelation that Marie is dead. Things seem so happy that it really rubs salt in the wound that is the present. It's so clear that these characters were so close and had a lot of love for each other. And the game does a lot to show us what life was like back then outside of just the dream world, which only shows us the dynamic between the characters but no specific events. But there are plenty of points when we will be able to see these actual events. It's compounded by the fact that if you're playing this as an adult, you're likely thinking of childhood friends you lost touch with, or had a falling out with, or went your separate ways in general. It brings to mind the inherent bittersweet nature of the memories that lead up to those events. It really makes you feel it. Those times that always feel happier and more carefree with the gift of hindsight. You'll notice as you flip through that many of the pictures are missing, likely the result of Aubrey keeping them. At this point, I began to explore the house and found that there was another white orchid, just like the one by Marie's grave. It's in the room with Basil's dying grandmother. This flower seems to be a way Basil copes with death. The fact that it represents them staying in his dreams, staying with him somehow. Though Jer took this a bit more literally than Basil did. Basil decides to give Jer the photo album, saying he needs it the most, and directly points out that his obsession with taking pictures could be based in the fear of one day losing what he had. If we rewind to the beginning of the game, this actually makes a lot of sense with one of his statements there. He said that he only takes pictures of people when they least expect it, so that he's actually capturing a moment in time. Not a fabricated one, but a genuine one. After this, you sit down to eat dinner with everyone, and Basil finds out that Jer is moving. He immediately asks to be excused. You follow him and find him having what seems to be a panic attack in the bathroom, with one of the dark, shadowy structures beneath him. He says something that comes across as extraordinarily ominous. You can see it too, can't you? Something behind you? When you look in the mirror, once again you see the shadowy creature that has appeared several times prior. But Basil acknowledging it verbally makes it feel more real. And the fact that he can also see it led me to believe that this was a representation of a kind of shared trauma between the two of them. It seems to both follow them and only be seen by them, just like trauma. Because trauma is an event that refuses to stay in the past, one that only creeps its way back into the present for those involved. And if left unaddressed, even if it's not consciously in your head at any given moment, it's still there, toying with your thoughts. This is why sometimes Omori or Jer sees the creature in front of him, and sometimes he sees it in the mirror behind him. The culprit behind the fear the whole time. At this point, your only option is to leave the bathroom, and Basil says, "Wait, please, Jer, don't leave me, not again." This was so heartbreaking that I reloaded a save and replayed through several minutes just to see if there was some way I could have stayed with him, but I just had to leave him again, abandoning Basil for what obviously is not the first time. A cycle you cannot yet break. You go back to the dining room and meet up with Kel and Basil's caretaker, Polly. Polly expresses concern for Basil's behavior, and then Kel and Jer leave, and after returning to Jer's, part ways for the night. Upon entering the house, we are greeted with yet another fear. spiders. This is another one that I share with the protagonist, even more so than heights, probably in part due to their greater prevalence in my life. Spiders scare the ever-living fuck out of me. The way they move, the fact that they have more legs than any one thing has any business having, they leave their nasty butt silk around for people to walk into. I'm so afraid of them, I'm unable to get footage of them to speak over during this segment. Even pictures and videos are too much for me. I genuinely have nightmares about them. I see ones that aren't there when I'm half awake during times of high stress or when I'm in a bad mental state. They are a physical manifestation of my fear. This is a borderline one-to-one comparison of the scene when you enter Jer's house. There are spiders everywhere. Luckily, the cartoonish variety don't scare me, but the house is completely covered in them. And eventually, you begin to once again climb the terrifying staircase, surrounded by a shadowy version of their spider legs. When you reach the top, you see the main shadow creature, and then Marie, before being attacked by a large spider. It appears to be another manifestation of the something that you had to fight earlier on the staircase. It should be noted that the calm down ability learned in the last fight heals Jer, furthering the implication that this is all emotionally based, if calming down has a healing effect on his HP. And just like then, you can only win by learning a new ability, Focus. The second you use this, the fight is over, and it is revealed the threat the entire time was one single spider that could easily be stepped on and dispatched. This is how a fear of spiders feels sometimes, though. One spider in a room can feel so all-encompassing. It's the only thing I can think about or focus on. The house feels like it's covered because something that is taking up a tiny percentage of my wall has taken up 100% of my mind. This visualization of it was perfect, and I think it's brilliant they added the house being covered in addition to actually having to fight one with the something face on it. This ends the first full day in the real world, and Jer drifts back off into white space and back into playing the part of Omori. Part 4. Sweet Relief. You immediately meet back up with your friends, and that feeling of relief I had last time I returned to the dream world was multiplied by 100. I knew this world was not Jer's reality, but Jer's reality was so upsetting. At this point, I was invested in his escape too. I got why he was doing it. The dream world felt so much better. It made me laugh, and the real world made me actually cry. It was impossible to judge him for constructing it because I was glad he did. I knew this was obviously not the way to handle his problems, but he likely did too. The divide between player and character was beginning to narrow, and that aspect of storytelling and design will be more and more vital as the game goes on. But for now, the second full day in the dream world was ahead. You go to the start room again, talk to your friends again, take your allowance from the snake again, and exit the rainbow stump again. The next stop to look for Basil, as foreshadowed by the real world, is past the spider web that has been blocking the way. Hiro is afraid of spiders too and must also overcome his fear this time. Heading back that way, you run into some sprout moles discussing a sweetheart show they wish to attend and how excited they are about it. They then proceed to fight you for some reason, because that's just more fun than not fighting them, I suppose. The important part was the information about the show and the fact that they dropped tickets to said show after you murdered them, which was the only course of action for getting tickets to the show you just found out about. Understandable. The friends discuss possibly stopping by to watch. At this point, I ventured off to explore some of the game's side content. I boarded a train, and while on said train, Omori and his friends were attacked by another shadowy creature, one that walks on all fours. Everyone but Omori enters the afraid emotional state, and everyone but Omori can only attack but cannot use any of their skills. This is a strange, almost reversal, considering the only time we've seen the afraid status effect up to this point has been with Jer himself. It feels like yet another instance of Jer or Omori deciding on when Omori is and isn't scared. He can instantly overcome fears in this world, and I think staying calm in the face of this creature despite his friends being scared may be cathartic for him. The creature also keeps repeating Jer, as if it is aware of the outside world or something brought in subconsciously by Jer. The word liar is also briefly flashed in the corner. I don't think I caught this until I watched back the footage. Finally, at the end of the fight, the creature says Jer, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry is written in the same font as Basil's text when he is in one of his bad mental states. This suggests a possible connection to the real-world Basil. After the fight, everything returns to its previous cheery state, and there is no mention of this fight by any of the friends. It was another sort of crack in the dream world. I like that they added this, given that it seems to be an optional area, not following the current main story. After a bit more exploring, I returned to the main storyline. We had to go through the spider web, and it was basically a repeat of the latter. Omori essentially instantly gets over his fear. Hiro, however, remains afraid of spiders, which honestly makes him the braver one. The bravest people are the ones who are afraid of everything, but continue to do stuff, I said, patting myself on the back and jerking myself off, which is like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach, so it's pretty impressive. My girlfriend told me that joke was gross and I considered taking it out, but I left it in for artistic integrity. Omori slices through the spider web that had previously been blocking the path, and the kids continue into the Firefly Forest. It requires you to reassemble train tracks to get a cart up to the proper speed so you can break through debris in the next area. It involves a lot of trying to get around spiders or spider-like creatures. Omori remains fearless, like there are zero remnants of his old fear that was so severe he couldn't even enter before. Whereas anytime Hiro enters a battle with even a slightly spider-like creature, he gets the afraid emotional state. Omori never has this, never actually has to face his fears, because his fear does not stay for him to face it. It simply dissolves when it is convenient for him. When they finally make it through, Hiro breaks down and hugs Marie, who has appeared at a save point on the other side of the debris somehow, and Omori remains as emotionless as ever. You continue ahead, fight a bug that appears to have been killing sprout moles, and enter Sprout Mole Village, which contains the entrance to Sweetheart's castle and her show that you acquired tickets to earlier. I took some time here to explore around the village, which contains some silly and entertaining dialogue detailing a pretty much universal obsession with tofu among the sprout moles, as well as more sprout moles completely obsessed with Sweetheart. From here, the kids enter the show and take their seats among the sprout moles. It begins and is revealed to be a dating show with 3 contestants for Sweetheart to choose from, 2 sprout moles and 1 creature from the Otherworld campground. They bring out Sweetheart and describe her as
pulchritudinous,
a word which I have always known. Lightning then strikes the Otherworld campground creature and the lights go out. After a quick little side segment where you go into the basement to get the lights back on, the show continues and now someone else is needed to replace the 3rd contestant. Upon returning to the stage, a mustached mole stops the friend group, calls Hiro hot, and makes him be the 3rd contestant. The show officially begins and questions are asked. The 2 sprout moles are carried to the dungeons after giving very normal answers. And then Sweetheart agrees with the mustache mole that Hiro is indeed very hot. Sweetheart is given no likable traits whatsoever here. She has the most annoying laugh ever to be put into a game with no voice acting. She is classically villainous, entitled, selfish, and completely lacks self-awareness. All of this perfectly conveyed through this one short scene. Hiro is clearly not interested, but it's as if that never seemed like a possibility to her, and she keeps ignoring it despite him saying it outright. This is a result of the fact that no one else here, the sprout moles, seem to acknowledge or care about these negative traits. They inexplicably believe her to be infallible. She has seemingly never faced a consequence here. Everyone retains an undying love, like a cult or Ben Shapiro's fans. After it finally sinks in that Hiro doesn't want to marry her, she sends the friends to the dungeon. The next chunk of the game is devoted to escaping, and it's pretty sizable. Not a lot of it falls into the category of things I need to discuss in this video, though it is very enjoyable, mostly humor or gameplay driven stuff. Except one part, which some may not have ever encountered, though it isn't an exceptionally well hidden secret, just one that is entirely possible to miss. There is a secret room after you escape from the dungeon in the castle itself. You can find this creature there, referred to as the Keeper of the Castle. Its dialogue reveals that this castle may be a construction for Sweetheart, the same way the rest of the world is for Jer. Sweetheart appears to be the dream world counterpart of Miss Candace, the owner of the candy shop in the real world. Her character traits here seem like inferences based on how Jer perceives Miss Candace, as she has things like a cardboard cutout of herself in the candy shop and oozes with fake sweetness. Sweetheart exists as an extreme version of this perception perception, and the escape she constructed takes on a similar hyperbolic form. Everyone here worships her the way she wants people to in her real world. To me, this explains a lot about why she would be so into Hiro. He isn't one of these sprout moles fabricated specially to worship her. And I mean, he's also a human, and as objectively bangable as we all think these sprout moles are, it makes sense she would go for another human being. But I think the deeper meaning here comes from the fact that this is a glimpse at what her real desires are. Just as Jer is hiding from his reality here, which won't improve anything in the long run, she is doing the same. And Hiro serves as a glimpse into the reality she would prefer to be improved. This world is an alternative to a reality she hates. It's her idea of what would make her happy. But as a recovering drug addict, I know our own perceptions of what might make us happy are very often incredibly inaccurate when we are not okay with ourselves. Usually it results in a twisted set of desires that only serve to perpetuate misery. And what's interesting is this is something that Jer's subconscious seems to have cooked up for him. It's almost like it's projecting what Jer is doing onto someone he considers unlikable, someone he would never recognize as mentally healthy, in an attempt to show him what he is doing. The keeper of the castle implies part of this in his dialogue, when they say that no amount of worship from the inhabitants of the castle will make Sweetheart feel fulfilled, and she will soon leave in search of more. He offers Omori the upcoming vacancy, knowing he craves an escape as well. They say that Omori's soul is split and he must choose, presumably between his truth and this delusion. Going forward, eventually you make it all the way back to the theater in time to catch the end of the show. Sweetheart has chosen herself to marry, her reasoning being that no one else could be as perfect as her. I understand this feeling. Like, look at me. But I still choose to date because that is a sad existence. And this is exactly what Aubrey points out. She objects and essentially says that self-love is a good thing, but only loving yourself is depressing and lonely. In making herself a deity within this castle, she has bought into her own lie and began to believe she truly was better than everyone else. Her coping mechanism has left her all alone, surrounded by fans, marrying the idea of herself. It really displays the grim consequences of buying fully into your own delusions. I think part of what Aubrey said had gotten to her because she goes on to try to marry Hiro again. After he once again rejects her, she accuses him of jealousy and attacks. Assuming jealousy is a classic tactic of protecting one's ego. Unless you're referring to the dislikes on my video, that is the only possible motivation. I put a lot of work into these, what is your problem? A battle ensues and Sweetheart wields her happiness like a weapon, in a similar fashion to what Captain Spaceboy did with anger. It's an emotion you just have to work around in this fight when she goes into higher levels of happiness like ecstatic, and she starts being unable to be sad or angry. It really throws a wrench in the works because she also makes the friends angry, using her annoying laugh. Which also makes the player angry because they have to hear it as well. And as we've seen in the beginning, angry is weak to happy. Anger can be a great call to action in standing up for yourself or someone else. But nothing makes anger a less effective emotion than the recipient of that anger being unaffected, or even remaining happy. It's like being ineffective while you're at full power. That was a nerdy way to say that, huh? You know, when you're at your top power level, which is not working. Changing the friend's emotion becomes kind of a hopeless strategy, and I found it best to just brute force this fight. In a sense, not letting her get to you. Eventually the fight is over and Sweetheart is defeated. But the arc has a happy ending when Captain Spaceboy returns and wins her over with romantic spontaneity, and marries her. This does not work as well with real-world weddings of exes, though I'm yet to try enough times to have a valid sample size, so we'll see. Sweetheart declares that she won't need the stage anymore and blows a giant hole in it. Then she and Captain Spaceboy leave together in a spaceship. You then try to leave the room, but Omori is drawn to the hole in the stage. You jump and plummet into what appears to be a sort of library, filled with more white orchids. This is a massive break in the dream world. It feels so out of place. Perhaps it was brought about by Jer seeing some of the problems with Sweetheart in himself. Something broke through, resulting in a break from his escape, a momentary deviation towards truth. Omori arrives in this completely foreign place with none of his friends. His friends also disappeared when he followed Shadow Basil after the Otherworld arc. It seems to be a sign of him approaching the truth, being on his own as Jer so often is in the real world. His friends act as a shield from this, and their absence is representative of that breakdown. Exploring the library leads to many unreadable sections that simply state the library has long since been abandoned by its keepers. But you can find certain books that are readable. They appear to contain Jer's memories, but with everyone's names blanked out, except for the number of characters they contain. The friends present in each memory can be sorted out through context and through this information. Besides just showing showing that these memories have been suppressed, the fact that it is presented this way is effective in furthering the connection between the player and Jare. They have these memories, so even if it is just subconsciously through Omori, they know who is in them without actually having to see the names. And making the player sort it out like this as well gives them that much more connection, like they know without directly being told to. Some of the memories are happy ones, presumably tucked away in the subconscious for that reason. Jare doesn't want to think about how great his reality used to be. It only makes the current state of things cut that much deeper. Stored here is also a memory that combines his fear of heights, spiders, and water. In it, it is clear he fully trusts Hiro and Kel to help him, to be there in a way that they have not been in so long. This all explains the library's abandonment. Additionally, there is an excerpt of Jare expressing frustration with having picked up the violin, because his lessons took place during the time the rest of his friends were hanging out on Sunday morning. A hobby he had initially seemed very excited about in the photo album had become an inconvenience that he had seemingly grown out of. I have had many of these things in my life, so the feeling conveyed here was palpable, as was the implication of a fear of telling others that you wanted to quit. I actually played football as a kid, and I was obsessed with the idea of it leading up to actually playing. I used to watch it with my dad, I would play Madden, I knew a ton about it and was convinced I would make an incredible running back. When I started playing though, not only was I not given the position of running back, instead being used as a lineman, I was easily the worst lineman on the team and likely all teams. Part of me was persistent and thought that if I worked hard, I would improve, but that died quickly, along with my love for the sport, and subsequently all sports. The people I played with were cruel to me, and it was an overall horrendous experience. I was partially in denial that I even hated it though, even though I constantly dreaded it throughout the day and couldn't wait for a practice or game to be over once it began. I had played it up as part of my identity for a huge percentage of my then very short life. It felt wrong to drop it after that. I felt like I would be disappointing people, like my parents who had spent money on me playing it and believed it was making me happy, not miserable. When the cruelty from the other players reached a boiling point, I couldn't handle it anymore and it became much easier to quit. My family was understanding, but also very confused. I didn't tell them a lot of the reasons why, and I had shown no signs of disliking it up to that point. So I understand this feeling Jare must be feeling with the violin. This was likely compounded by the fact that it was an activity he did with Marie, who accompanied him on the piano. After finishing exploring the library, you exit and view another disturbing cinematic of Basil, followed by an image of a key that says, "Don't forget it's in the toy box." After getting too close to reality, you are again thrust into white space, Omori's automatic response to the threat of seeing through his coping mechanism. It's clear at this point it's become basically a reflex. You choose the stab option again and a card comes up stating there are now 2 days left until the move. Part 5. The reversal begins. Kel is again at the door. He says that Hiro will be back that night and invites Jare to join him on some errands to get ready for his arrival. Before continuing the main story, I again explored the neighborhood doing comparably mundane tasks, though ones that are very important in the real world. One of the mundane yet important tasks you do is helping find this artist's dog. Doing so allows you to go into her home and you can find a lot of trash, which is quickly becoming bizarrely exciting to get. The artist appears to be Aubrey's friend Angel's older sister. You can find Angel's notebook labeled faux facts like the ones from the dream world, with these drawings depicting his older sister in a pretty unflattering light, as well as Kel and Jare. Kel's is just insulting, while Jare's is a bit more unsettling. It's him holding the knife and he's labeled as quiet. As Jare replaces the real world with the dream world, he becomes more and more foreign to the real world. In his mind, using a knife to fight is normal. He does it every night, and at the end of the night, all the important characters live. He is quiet and reserved in part because of his trauma, part because he appears to have always been that way, and part because there's never any real reason for him to speak while he's in the dream world. His loving friends do all the talking for Omori. Subsequently, this is how people see him now, as alien, as a mystery. And the Kel picture is funny. He's smelly and stinky. Brilliant. After a bit more wandering, I found Basil in the park. Kel invites him to hang out, but he politely declines, seeming very anxious the whole time. And he doesn't seem to understand what Kel means when he asks if he's feeling better than yesterday, referring to him disappearing into the bathroom. Kel had assumed it was an upset stomach and doesn't press on the issue. The conversation ends with Kel saying they can always hang out at a later date, and Basil seeming hopeful that they would. Almost like he wanted to go, but his mental health was holding him back. Like an external force, not one that's a part of him, just like something. I went on to explore the town and do the errands that Kel needed. When arriving at the pizza place to get food, you can overhear a conversation between some of Aubrey's friends discussing how they will be going to their hangout spot, and one of them will be bringing a fishing pole, implying it's near water. I like this little interaction, because it gives the player a chance to see how these characters are without the people Aubrey has deemed bad around. They're still a bit antagonistic, but they seem like just normal kids goofing around. There isn't an attempt to make them an antagonist in this moment. This pairs well with the sympathy that was invoked for Aubrey at the church. The real world is slowly but surely losing the black and white impression it gave when you first encountered it. After finishing Kel's chores, you return to his house and he points out he was super late to get these done. He suggests Jer goes in first because his mom will be so excited to see him, she'll forget she's mad at Kel. His sneaky plan mostly works, and then there's some time to go to Kel's room before dinner. He shows you around, fills you in on what's been going on with his family, having a new baby, you steal $20 from him, and then his mom calls out to them that there's a girl at the door for him. Yeah, you stole $20 from him. I did. I don't know if you did. Am I not going to take it? It's not real, guys. It's Basil's caregiver, and she doesn't know where Basil is. The boys decide to head out to look for him. I did some last-minute exploring before heading out, though, and stole pepper spray from Kel's mom's purse. I don't know why you're allowed to steal so much from these people. I figured we could use it if there was a fight, given everyone hated the knife. I set out to look for Basil, and Kel hears him cry out for help. The sound's coming from the woods by the park. You find the entrance to the sacred hangout spot where he presumably is, and you find him back there with Aubrey's group of friends who do not want him there. They say they don't want to hurt him, they just want him to leave. Kel points out that this was their old hangout spot before Aubrey's new friend group took it over. Aubrey has replaced her friend group, but seemingly still clings to aspects of the old one. She has fond memories of this spot, but can't bear to be there with the friends she perceived as turning their backs on her. After a bit more back and forth, Aubrey and her friends fight Jer and Kel. This was a 6v2 fight, and I was ready to strap in because it seemed like it was going to be an arduous test. Oh, I forgot I had the pepper spray. So you win the fight fair and square, no knives, and all of Aubrey's friends leave. It's now just Jer, Kel, Basil, and Aubrey. Aubrey yells, asking where they all were when she needed them. Then she says to Basil, "How dare you still show your face after what you did?" This is an important line going forward. It is not yet clear what she believes Basil did, but it's a jarring accusation for the player to hear. Basil has been nothing but innocent and the victim in everything we've seen up to this point. What could he have done so wrong to elicit such a response? Is he even capable of doing something that bad? He just genuinely didn't seem like he could do something terrible to me. Following this, Basil tries to explain, then Aubrey tells him to get away from her and pushes him into the lake. She follows this with saying shoot, implying this was not intentional. This is another part to put a bookmark in going forward. It is clear Basil cannot swim, and Jer steps up to the water. Another one of his fears. A box comes up asking if you will save Basil. Anyone who clicks no should be on a list of people who aren't allowed. They just aren't allowed to do. You go in after Basil, facing the fear head on because you have to for Basil. Jer is thrust into an underwater version of his house, with the red glowing light shining through. You begin to head down the stairs and Marie is standing on them. Her theme song, By Your Side, begins to play in a slower fashion, a bit more twisted and a bit more gargly, like it is being played underwater with them. You follow her into an abyss below and then find and pick up the knife. Upon doing so, she vanishes and something appears beneath Jer. It drags him under the water and a fight ensues. It appears to be with seaweed of some kind, and comforting messages appear on screen. It encourages Jer to continue on, and he learns yet another new move: persist. This doesn't immediately end the fight like the other previous moves did. It pulls you further up with each use, showing how far Jer had to plunge into the depth of his own dread. He had to rise from the water physically and emotionally, and with each use of persist, he got a little bit closer. Upon the third use, a cutscene plays showing Jer unconscious under the water, presumably having dreamt these things, and what appears to be Marie going in to save him. This is obviously metaphorical, as Jer wakes up to the sight of Hero. Basil, however, is still unconscious, though still breathing. Aubrey asks where you think you're going as you rush away with him and bring him back to Polly, his caretaker. After laying him down in bed, Hero says that he should be fine and explains how he found you. He then asks for details on what happened and is in disbelief when Kel tells him that Aubrey pushed Basil into the lake. This was honestly a more reasonable response, to think it was some kind of accident. Kel had developed a bias towards Aubrey because of how antagonistic she's been lately and has not really given a lot of thought to her side of things. He sees her her as the clear-cut bad guy, just as she accuses him of doing, whereas Hiro has been away and still remembers the old version of Aubrey. The current Aubrey lies somewhere in the middle, a place where she wouldn't intentionally try to push Basil into a lake, but also would still be cruel to him verbally. This is an interesting interaction because it adds some much-needed balance, as Hiro always does, to mediate between Aubrey and Kel. Hiro then expresses that he feels guilty having gone away to college, feeling some level of blame for how badly things have gone. They return home and their mom is very dramatic about the dinner being cold, considering they've saved Basil's life. This isn't about you right now, Kel's mom. Kel's dad diffuses the situation. His mom goes to check on the baby and the kids go to the kitchen to reheat the food. Kel fills Hiro in on the move with Jer, and Hiro offers his reassurance that everything will be okay. They then begin to reminisce about how things used to be, and interestingly point out how the place they miss hanging out the most is at Jer's house. This kind of indicates that Jer's self-isolation is part of what pulled the rug out from the rest of their friendships. I don't know if you've had an experience growing up where you had a group of friends that always hung out at one person's house, but it kind of becomes a staple of that friend group. They were the glue that held everyone together, and so was the location. The lack of that location doesn't necessarily mean a friend group will dissolve, but it can become a huge factor when paired with the world-shaking trauma of having that group grieve their friend's suicide. Add in one of them leaving for college and Basil seemingly sharing a level of lasting trauma along with Jer, and you can see why the friend group disbanded and why Aubrey was left all on her own when she needed everyone the most. She wanted to process these feelings while Jer wanted to hide from them, to suppress them and everything that might have the chance of bringing them about, including Aubrey. This is the root of the clash, a complete misunderstanding of each other's emotional state. And sometimes when you don't understand a friend or loved one's hurtful behavior, we are quick to assign malice because of how painful it is. I know I've been guilty of this hasty assignment. It hurt me as if it was intentional, therefore, it must be intentional. This scene is followed by the boys looking back through the photo album again. Every time we begin to understand more of what is going on, it flashes back to how things used to be. And now we can look at it with greater context. The first picture with Jer happy to have his violin is now recontextualized from what we found out in the library. There are some silly ones as well, and one of Jer where Basil writes in the description that he's very shy but a great listener. Jer seems to lean more in the direction of knowing how to listen to a friend's problems than knowing how to express his own. It's clear he's the one who needs a good listener now, but refuses to say anything to be heard. As someone who was already predisposed to this, the trauma he endured appears to be really stunting him completely. You continue to flip through, but are still missing many of the photos. Hiro points out that the one thing all the remaining photos have in common is that Marie is not in them. It seems Aubrey has kept the pictures containing Marie while attempting to throw out the rest of the album. Aubrey feels so abandoned by the rest of the group, Marie is the only one she wants to maintain memories of. In a strange way, she likely views her as the only innocent party here. Some people, while mourning the suicide of a loved one, go through a stage where they feel as if they've abandoned them, and rightfully so in many ways. A feeling of how could they leave me like this? But Aubrey had living friends she could direct this exact feeling at. They were alive and literally blocks away at most, but would never actually show up for her. Their help seemed so within reach to wind up being something that never came. Of everyone that had left her, they were the only ones that maintained an option not to do so. Hiro seems disappointed and a bit hurt by the lack of Marie's photos, but still sees the positive in having the pictures that are left. He then decides they should go hang out at Jer's house one last time before he moves. They go to inform their mom of the plan, and she's upset even though it's literally completely reasonable given Hiro will be here the entire summer. Jer is leaving like tomorrow, and they haven't seen him or been to his house where they always used to be in years, so the dad convinces her it's fine and she says it's okay, but Hiro has to wash the dishes the rest of the week. Why are you so spiteful, Kel's mom? This was such a reasonable request. Hiro has been successfully manipulated, so he decides they should go get flowers for their mom before heading to Jer's house. I took this as an excuse to explore around the town again, curious about what having Hiro with us would change. I thought interesting touch they added was, if you try to go back to Marie's grave with Hiro, he says he doesn't feel ready yet and you can't enter the graveyard. Everyone grieves so differently, and adding this little detail does a lot to highlight that. I got the flowers and then stopped back to check on Basil. The first thing he said was, "Oh, Jer, there's no way out of this, is there?" Hiro and Kel dismiss this as Basil just having been through a lot, but it seems to be a direct reference response to whatever trauma Jer and Basil seem to share. He believes that there is no way to relieve that feeling, that thing behind them, like it will always follow them no matter what. This is interesting because it doesn't actually seem as if they've tried anything, and I can relate to that feeling like fixing my mental health was impossible despite having never even tried yet. It's one of the tricks it can play, discounting possibilities until the only one left is staying with it. That's how traumas and poor mental health cling on to life. They need you to be there. They need you to hold on to them, and they convince you to do so. This suspicion has some confirmation directly thereafter when you talk to his caregiver, and she complains that she knows almost nothing about him, and she wishes he would open up, but the boys don't seem to think much of it and head back out. Additionally, when you examine his camera, you see that it is dusty, which means he stopped doing the things he's enjoyed, drilling home his mental state of having given up. This is, of course, not a judgment on this aspect of depression. It's an acknowledgement of that depression. When you are in a mental state where you no longer derive joy from the things you used to, it's hard to not give up. Another thing, although small, I want to point out is when going into Kim and Vance's room, Kim says, "Aubrey, why won't you tell me what's wrong?" Implying Aubrey is not opening up about any of this as well. This would make sense as she never got a chance to really talk to her old friends about it. Suppressing it after that could have easily become a reflex, one that's even harder to break when trying to open up to new friends that don't even know the situation. Eventually, I made it back to Kel's house and gave the flowers to his mom. She apologized for acting like she did earlier. "Thank you for owning up to your mistakes," Kel's mom. "It takes a really big person to do, especially with everything you've got on your plate right now. I'm very proud." The boys then head back to Jer's house, and Kel points out how crazy it is he lives right next door, and yet it's been years since he's been inside his house, directly acknowledging how much the emotional distance outweighed the physical distance between the friends. They go in, decide to stay overnight, then Hiro checks to see if the piano is still there in a room Jer had been afraid to enter. He sits down to play for a bit. When he gets up, he mentions there was a song Jer and Marie used to play together over and over, implying it has some importance. After this, Kel says he's sleepy and they decide to go to bed. Hiro points out they should sleep in Jer's room because Jer had always hated sleeping alone. This fear seems like yet another thing that played a role in formulating the dream world. He doesn't really sleep alone because of it. He is using hundreds of other characters to fill the hole Marie left. White space is a cheap and poorly done facsimile of that safe feeling that Marie provided, presumably tainted now by the memory of what happened. It represents a kind of fight between suppression and wanting to feel that feeling again, like he's protected. At this point, if you enter Jer's parents' room, Marie will temporarily be standing in front of the picnic basket before fading away. When Jer returns to his room, Hiro and Kel have set up a little fort for them to sleep in. They give Hiro his cookbook gift, a remnant of a time when becoming a cook instead of a doctor was still a possibility for him. Kel falls asleep immediately while Hiro and Jer share a heartfelt moment. They go to sleep and a cutscene plays where Jer disappears and Omori takes his place. Part 6. A collapsing facade. You don't start in white space this time, but in the starting room of the dream world. Trying to enter white space will result in you looking through the keyhole and seeing the shadow creature in there. The safest place Jer has created has been invaded. That rhymes. Whatever. Just from this alone, there is already a distinct difference in the dream world. It feels different, it feels changed. Like going past the snake and outside will not result in the same outcome it has every time before. This feeling is further confirmed upon talking to the snake. It no longer gives you a clam allowance, but instead takes the role of the cat from white space, asking, waiting for something to happen? You exit to find the world abandoned. It seems the presence of actual friends in the real world has shifted this world. You can't find anyone until heading to the final place that is yet to be opened, the water, north of the stump. The fear overcome in the previous day in the real world was water, so this is the obvious next step. Upon arriving there, you find Marie standing at the end of the dock. She reiterates that everyone is gone, but they may be somewhere across the water. She then joins your party, no longer rooted to a save point. You both swim across a vast body of water, seeing shadows of your friends. When you make it to the next set of docks, Marie points out that she is proud of all the fears Omori has overcome, but there is still one more that will be harder to deal with than the rest. You eventually arrive at a curtain and Marie says Omori has forgotten something, that she knew she shouldn't have come, but it gets lonely without everyone, and then addresses Jer directly to say she misses him. Then something remarkable happens. The screen goes white and Marie appears appears in her real-world color scheme. This implies that in some sense of the word, it was the real Omori talking. Or at the very least, Jare has imported a real-world representation of her, rather than the nostalgic memory of her from 4 years ago she had been, up until now. She then disappears into the window behind the curtain and leaves Omori behind. He makes his way down a well and a long ladder all the way to a road. Upon trying to go this way, someone in a toll booth tells him it's a carpool only and to come back when he has friends, drawing attention to how alone he is. Everything seems so empty and devoid of the vibrance this world previously had. It's like the better the real world situation is, the more this one shifts. That sense of relief from going from the real world to the dream world has turned on its head. This feels worse than the world we just left, one where Kel and Hiro are there for comfort, and you don't feel so alone. On top of this, unhealthy escapes such as this are some of the most brutal examples of the law of diminishing returns. My dream world used to be drugs. They began as an escape from my problems, from my negative thought process. They shut all of that up. But as time went on, they were less and less effective until they became my problems. Until it was just me, high, by myself, wallowing in what I was trying to run from. I had a friend I would always call every time I'd get fucked up, and then one time he asked me, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I'm doing it so I can forget about my problems." And he said, "You called me to talk about your problems." And then proceeded to send me rehabs that were on my insurance. Thank you, Quentin. Seeing this world turn so lonely felt like a one-to-one representation of that. Eventually you find Kel at a resort. Apparently all of the kids have been tricked into signing contracts for shitty jobs at the last resort. An exaggerated, though only slightly, version of how quickly adulthood hits. One minute you're a child and you're playing with your friends, and the next minute you're working minimum wage at a Staples copy print, even though you wanted to work with the computers because you like those and would actually be good at it, but you fail to exercise any form of control over the hours you spend there while you're crushed under the full weight of a corporation, and customers are screaming at you because the Staples website didn't work, which isn't part of your fucking job. Subscribe to my channel so I don't have to do stuff like that again. Kel says they should go find Aubrey first, joins your party, and immediately abandons his post. You find Marie at a standard save point back in her dream world color scheme, seemingly not at all remembering the interaction they just had minutes prior. The dream world has, superficially at least, gotten back on track. There's plenty of the zaniness of the previous 2 days, like having to give this ghost's friends direction to their party because they forgot to tell them where it was. And they're all ghosts. That's the zany part. Although things seem more or less normal, it's clear each passing day is bringing more and more instability to this world. The last crack in it was the largest one yet, and even the state it returns to is still a drastically altered one. Kel and Omori enter the resort and have to fight their way through the Gator Guy security. These are cool fights as they are more challenging given you only have 2 party members. It also makes the player more connected to the goal of finding the others because the game is much harder without them. I went on to explore the floors leading up to the one with Aubrey. There's a lot of references to the boss, Mr. Jossum. He is a shark, a not so subtle metaphor for sharks. Eventually you get to Aubrey, who is doing her job as a receptionist. She seems unwilling to break from it and is entirely engrossed in and overwhelmed by it. It's a complete departure from the beginning of the game where she could go wherever she wants and do whatever she wants. She is imprisoned here by expectations, internal and external. And it's not until Kel has her take some deep breaths and reminds her of Basil, she remembers what the actual goal is. The fact that she had already forgotten about Basil for this long extends the size of the crack in Jare's fabricated world. And even after being reminded, she still feels she has to stay. Mr. Jossum calls Aubrey and Kel tells him he quit, so Jossum calls him to his office along with Aubrey because she hadn't answered the phone for 10 seconds. They arrive and tell Mr. Jossum that their quest to find Basil was more important than the contracts they signed, and he surprisingly agrees. They then try to get Hiro too, and he declines, saying he's the best employee they've ever had. The kids remind Hiro of Basil, who has appeared to have also forgotten. To leave, you have to fight Mr. Jossum and his bodyguards. I easily dispatch them with the power of this game being not that hard. Then he calls in the even stronger Pluto, who assumes his final form. His power level is off the charts, but I used Omori to exploit his obvious weakness of being stabbed repeatedly, and eventually won the fight. Mr. Jossum just lets the kids go at this point. The kids reach the entrance and realize they don't even know how they ended up working here. Their last memory memory is falling through the hole that Sweetheart left in the stage. They do not exist absent of Jer. They are just waiting to assume the positions that Jer's subconscious chooses when he sleeps, and the details are sloppily filled in later. This was such a large jump, though, that there are an unfillable number of unanswered details, so they just remain unanswered. On top of not realizing how they got there, they almost forgot about Basil again, and then wanted to draw a picture of him so they can ask people if they've seen him. And despite the confidence of Aubrey and Kel, no one could fully remember what he looked like. The image of Basil was slipping away, like forgetting the details of a childhood friend, except the process is expedited and jarring. Not knowing what else to do, they decide to head back to Deepwell. Since Omori has 3 friends with him now, they can go through the gate that was carpool only and get to the underwater highway. The first person you run into is Sweetheart again. She has left the castle just as the castle keeper has predicted, leaving Captain Spaceboy as well. Honestly, poor Captain Spaceboy. She's now planning on creating a perfect suitor, which is gross. The lesson from Sweetheart trying to marry herself before was that putting yourself above other people to the point where you can't connect with them at all and end up all alone is depressing and unhealthy. And the lesson of building a hot Frankenstein to bang is that it is gross. She leaves and the friends consider following her and then set out to explore. This is another chunk of the game with lots to do, but not a lot to say as far as the topics of this video essay are concerned. But you make it through a comparably complex set of underwater pathways, occasionally seeing Sweetheart as you go, until you come to a trench and cross it. Upon reaching the other side, the kids start to realize not only are they forgetting the way Basil looks, but also his personality. Kel says that Basil would have loved all the plants where they are, but then backtracks and is unsure of his statement. Hero points out he only remembers the general interests and features of Basil, like being warm, calm, and gentle, but no real specifics. Going along with the theme of growing up too fast, this happens to almost everyone. Childhood friends not just drifting away from you, but also drifting out of your memories. I don't remember the specifics of a lot of my old friends, even from college. The human brain can only hold so many nuanced versions of individuals. The rest of them must be abstracted out, a sort of rough approximation of what they are like. And this is a sad realization. A lot of the people you shared memories with, some of the memories you may still talk about today, are less fleshed out than the memories themselves. One time in early high school, I was with 3 friends. One of them, Dave, tried to hit a car with a snowball from behind a strip mall in my hometown. He missed, but the driver was still furious. He drove up to us, got out of his car, screamed, "Get back here, you little fuckers," and charged. Dave and Sean, both on the track team, took off running and the guy chased them. My friend Victor and I stood frozen with fear and could not have outran him even if we wanted to. Eventually, Dave and Sean got away from the man who was presumably attempting to murder children for the potential idea of his car getting a small scratch. Victor and I, however, were still frozen in fear by the man's car. He started to come back and we finally took off running. He gunned his car at us because he wasn't sure if he was coming off as enough of a psycho or not, and we ducked into a Panera Bread where a police officer yelled at us for throwing snowballs and gave the child murder man a pass. It was insane, and I'll never forget that night as long as I live. But all of those people, Dave, Victor, Sean, all of them have faded in my memory to varying degrees. I remained best friends with Victor long after high school and just lost contact with him a few years ago, so his memory is still relatively crisp in my mind. Dave is more faded. We became distant senior year when I started smoking weed and he started smoking Judgment. He did apologize for the way he treated me though, and we made up since then. We've kept in touch a few times, but I haven't seen him in person in almost a decade. And Sean is almost completely gone. I remember him from his presence and memories and some generalities, like he was a good dude and he was particularly awkward in high school. No judgment there though, so was I. But all the texture, all those things that make people's character traits unique to them, the stuff that makes one kind, warm, empathetic person different than another with that same description, has faded away. This is what's beginning to happen with these friends. Aubrey concludes that just because they don't remember doesn't mean he's not their friend, and doesn't mean he doesn't need their help. They continue on their journey through an increasingly alien underwater land, and at the end of this route, you reach a scary mouth with a whale named Humphrey inside. Humphrey says that Sweetheart is inside him looking for the 3 witches known as the Slime Girls, presumably because they are capable of creating a suitor for her. If all of this seems confusing, allow me to clarify. It is confusing. But the group's next step is to go into the whale after her. Upon entering, Humphrey demonstrates how he can make himself pop up out of various places within himself. Everyone but Aubrey agrees this is very cool. It also appears there are 3 different directions you can go from here, and a few hatches you have to get open. I'm not going to go too in depth on these, but each direction is the domain of one of the slime girls, Molly, Marina, and Medusa. They all seem to study a different science. Molly is engineering, Marina is biology, and Medusa is chemistry. Each area also houses something to remind the group of Basil. The first one I came across was a security camera. The friends start discussing pictures, and Kel mentions they have a lot of them. Aubrey seems perplexed by this notion, and then Kel quotes an out-of-context excerpt from Basil at the beginning of the game where he says he only takes pictures of people when they don't expect it. Everyone seems confused, and Kel briefly continues with the quote, stops abruptly, and no one seems to have known what he was talking about. Taking pictures is not only one of the most prominent aspects of Basil's personality, but also the one that involves his friends the most. Along the next path is the most heartbreaking moment in the group forgetting about Basil. They come across Basil's flower crown in the path, and no one recognizes it as Basil's at all. There's no mention of Basil. They all just say the flowers are too bruised for anyone to want it, and Kel kicks it off the cliff. Aubrey is upset about this, but not because it was Basil's, because it could have belonged to someone. The most distinctive part of Basil's appearance, the flower crown, has done nothing to remind them of his existence. You then enter the final way to go. In this area, the kids find a plant labeled Basil. This is literally his name on the thing he loves the most, and they still can't recall who he is. These effectively use his most distinctive characteristics to show definitively they've forgotten his personality, his appearance, and even his name. At this point, they legitimately believe the only reason they are here is because of Sweetheart. Each area also concludes with each slime girl's attempt at building Sweetheart a suitor. Upon finishing the first area, you see Sweetheart talking to Molly, who has finished their attempt. Though, because Sweetheart rushed her, she accidentally programmed it to kill instead of love. This was one of the most common mistakes in my computer science program. After getting angry, Sweetheart storms out and her suitor robot flies away. At the end of the second area, you can see Marina's attempt at making Sweetheart's soulmate, which is a grotesque copy of Sweetheart she deems completely unfuckable. She storms off and fails a second time to pay. And finally, at the end of the third area, there's a cutscene showing Medusa's attempt at Sweetheart's suitor breaking out of the glass. This one is a perfect copy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but Sweetheart hates it. This leaves absolutely no room for her to explain this away. Nothing could possibly make her happy. She storms off, and with all 3 areas completed, you can now go downstairs. Downstairs, you find Sweetheart arguing with the slime girls over whether or not she should pay, given she believed they failed to do what she asked. She storms off after pinning the responsibility of payment on you. The slime girls then have her disposed of by Humphrey, and it is implied that he ate her. Ultimately, Sweetheart's self-obsession led to her own demise. This was super dark for the dream worlds. It's almost hard to tell given how much dark is in this game overall, but when you consider where the dream world started and how lighthearted it was and how few real negative consequences occurred, Sweetheart being eaten alive is kind of a lot. Most of the darkness in the dream world up to this point has come from cracks in it, stuff that did not seem to be intended. This appeared to be baked right in. Following this, the slime girls demand an unpayable number of clamps from the group to cover the cost of Sweetheart's projects. When they can't pay, a fight ensues. The biggest move they have in this fight is one a ways in where they take all of your party's juice, meaning you can't do special attacks unless you replenish it. This is actually pretty jarring because nothing really that special had happened in this boss fight up to that point, and I haven't seen anything like this in the game before. They also have a massive health pool, but given enough items, the fight really isn't too difficult. Upon winning, the girls realize no one has fed Humphrey as the inside of the whale starts to shake. They say they are too tired to run after the fight, and Humphrey eats them too. This is 4 real deaths in this arc in the span of about 10 minutes. All characters who have had some level of development too. It happens slowly up to this point, but it's become abundantly apparent the dream world is now hostile. Humphrey is now planning to eat the kids too. You attempt an escape, but Humphrey gets you and another fight ensues. The real final boss of the day. This one still feels cartoonish, but the vibe of that cartoon has begun to swung towards horror and away from the children's fairy tale vibe that had Sweetheart sending people to the dungeon. This doesn't necessarily feel like a shift for the worst in Jer's psyche, so much as it feels like it's allowing more of that trauma and horrible feelings to bleed through than ever before. He now has Hero and Kel with him in the real world, allowing for him to feel a bit safer, more protected, and less prone to locking all of it away. The Humphrey fight has several phases as you go deeper inside him, which is something I should have phrased any other way. After winning, he ejects you out of his blowhole. I literally had to say blowhole. How else would I phrase that? The kids no longer know what to do because they have completely forgotten their quest to find Basil. You pick up the 2 hangman keys that have appeared and continue on. The next immediate step is to head through a whirlpool that took Humphrey's place. This part is very important in setting up what is to come, as there is dialogue from a mysterious origin as you swim along the path and a fuckload to analyze. But I'm only going to cover some of the currently relevant and understandable parts here. The rest will just be explained as we go. A few things are clear here though. This is a cycle. The stuff you've been through in the dream world has, in some variation, happened before. The still nebulous truth exists in this world, and Omori keeps burying it and moving it to a new location to protect Jer from it. Omori is quite literally the personification of Jer's repression. The truth was located previously in a lighthouse, a library, and a barn. The library and barn were both encountered in this playthrough, though I missed the lighthouse. It can be found when you are swimming with Marie in your party. It has a picture of Jer's family with every face etched out except for Marie's and a pair of binoculars through which you can see something. The other 2 can be seen at the end of each of the major days. Omori is yanked to whitespace after arriving there each time, trying to protect Jer from knowing too much. The dialogue goes on to say that this time the truth will be in the heart of a vast forest. It says no matter how many times the path is concealed, that Basil will always find it, and Marie will always lead him to it. This makes some sense. Back in the real world, it appears Basil is at least in some way confronting what happened more than Jer. Between the "you see it too" something behind you and "there's no way out of this, is there, Jer?" he seems to be directly referencing this truth in a way that Jer has not. And Marie would want him to confront whatever it is so he can move forward. The next set of dialogue speaks of how his fabricated friends cannot die here. They just continue to be revived. This seems to include those that seemingly die for real throughout the journey, like Sweetheart. When the process begins again, after Omori keeps Jer away from the truth, anyone that had previously died comes back. Certain ones that aren't revived will sink to the deep well and disappear. The next one reveals that Marie is confined to the picnic blanket because Jer can't watch her die again. It also bizarrely mentions that Marie has a bad knee, implying this detail is important in some way to what happened. If you're like me, you'll be wondering what this has to do with her suicide and why it was mentioned now and not before this point. Then the voice says that he is closer than ever before and begs the question, will he be able to bury it this time? Part 7. The Gravity of Guilt. Upon reaching the end of the path, the voice talks about using the keys to unlock the other realm. This seems to be specifically talking about the hangman keys. When you get all of them, you can spell out, "Welcome to Black Space." Then a cutscene flashes to Basil's house showing an abyss below something. I headed there next. Shadow Basil is there to greet you at the beginning of the path, and the entire walk to his house. He'll explain the meanings of the flowers again, making the game feel as if it's gone full circle in a sense. And this time it elicits a much more unsettling feeling than the first. Basil is referring to Omori as Jer, just talking directly to him. He is telling him the meanings of the flowers this time, not Omori. The shield Omori provides is starting to break down. Jer is more open here, exposed. Going to the screen after the flowers, there is a very long path with the trees becoming more and more dead as you pass through the fog. Reaching the outside of Basil's house, all the trees are dead, and the blue water that used to be outside has been replaced with a solid red. Inside the house, the floor is blown open, just like the stage in Sweetheart's castle. You see Basil enter, and you're given the same prompt you were given on the stage. It's a long way down. Do you want to jump? At this point, I'm afraid of the truth along with Jer. You plummet into a body of water, get out, and immediately have to cut a spider web to progress. All three fears in quick succession. The world is devoid of color until you reach Marie, laying in a coffin surrounded by white orchids. Jer is seemingly the one following her in his dreams now. A creature crawls out of her casket and grabs for Omori before disappearing and revealing a door. Continuing through it reveals black space. It's got the same basic central room as white space, but there's no sketchbook, no cat, no computer, only tissues to dry your tears and a save point. It's time to delve into the truth. I open the first door, and inside, a Shadow Basil says these rooms are full of broken things, but at least he can see who you really are now, implying that he can see Jer. Jer who belongs among these broken things. He asks you if you created the world above to protect this one or to hide it away, and says that it's become more powerful than him. His attempts to suppress have only strengthened it. If you have trauma and you've tried to suppress it, this may sound a bit familiar. If you spend enough time pushing it down and validating it, acting as if it's not eating away at you, it just gets worse as you are not developing the mechanisms to keep it at bay. You start thinking that you shouldn't feel this terrible about it, acting as if the feeling you're feeling is unjustified, and start becoming upset with yourself for even feeling it. Trauma and mental health problems thrive in the dark, untouched by acceptance, by coping mechanisms, and by support from others. Those negative pathways and the thought patterns that represent them continue to repeat, etching the patterns deeper and deeper into your brain, making it harder and harder to scale its walls and deviate from it. The only thing you can do is shine a light on them. But what is Jer's trauma? Is it Marie's suicide, or is there something more to it? It's still not clear. These rooms are full of disturbing imagery, like this Omori that appears to be melting. Basil confronts him multiple times. Here, he says he has to confront this truth for both of them, confirming my thought that they share whatever this trauma is, the something that follows them. Each room can be exited by letting the disembodied hands take you away after finding a key. You return to the hub room for black space each time. Eventually your sketchbook reappears and you can look through to find some more disturbing sketches than before, all coded in red. The computer screen is now just static as we've already reached the destination its previous incarnation was hinting at. In the following rooms, these ideas of lack of confession, lack of acceptance, and holding Basil back from getting better continues, as does the horrific imagery. This place exists to torture Jer, and the longer he's left it down here, the better it gets at it. The more things that have seeped through from the upper layers, amplifying it, worsening it, and expanding it. This place also gives off very hateful and accusatory feelings towards Jer. In this room, text pops up calling him a liar multiple times. At the end of this room, he encounters something. Something tells him they love him and then begins following him. This is seemingly sending a very conflicting message. In some sense, the thing he fears loves him. This makes sense with the narrative that Marie had killed herself, but doesn't explain him being called a liar, or how it would be dragging Basil down with him. In these rooms, you can also encounter a non-shadow form of Basil, one that is cheery like the one you met in the very beginning of the dream world. He seems fine and does not seem to understand black space the way Shadow Basil does. He doesn't know where he is, he's just trying to escape just like Jer. He reminisces about when things were better and brings about that feeling that this game is so good at manufacturing, that pairing of happy nostalgia with the terrifying present, that feeling Jer is so often experiencing. This is always contrasted with Shadow Basil, who knows this place so well. He refers to the player character as Jer, while the colorful Basil calls him Omori, highlighting how he exists as part of the fabricated world of Omori. At one point, Shadow Basil asks Jer if there's any hope. Jer seems to be the only one with an actual answer to this. He seems to hold the key to moving forward. After visiting several rooms, a red door appears, beckoning towards moving forward. But I needed to know what was going on and whether or not my current location held any answers, so I kept checking the remaining doors. All it did though was repeat the same awful things in different scenes and scenarios. Shadow Basil begging you, pointing out the direness of the situation, and seeing what Basil used to be only to take a morbid turn towards the end of whatever that room may be. He always begins happy to see Omori, excited he came to save him, and trusting him to do so. He fails every time, showing Jer how he's damaged and hurt Basil over and over again. Omori seems to be intentionally doing this to a degree. In one of the rooms, Basil tells Omori that there's something he needs to talk to him about. They pass under something, and on the other side, Basil is gone. This is extra heartbreaking given how Basil had written about what a great listener Jer was. He seemed to rely on him for that, and in this time where he needed that the most, Jer remains unable to help. Helplessness seemed to be a major element of this place for Jer. There's also a room where his friends are all walking around, but none of them will speak to him. Some of them appear faceless. Marie appears as a monster. It's showing how desperately Jer needs to talk about what's in his head and how much he feels unable to do that. In the final room of the area, the friend group bullies Basil after finally finding him, showing how ostracized he feels and likely on some level betrayed by the people that were always there for him. Leaving this area, I headed through that red door and found myself in a snowy area. You can ascend these stairs all the way up to a church, where you can find Basil in the position of where Jesus would be found on a cross, crucified trapped and dying on behalf of Jer. Shadow Basil appears and says you can face the truth together. You try to free the Basil trapped on the shadows stretched out behind him and are sent to Jer's living room with the red glowing light through the door to the backyard. Basil is dragged through and Omori follows him, stabs him when he finds him trapped, and continues forward. Omori is once again trying to hide the truth even though Jer is seemingly just inches away. He's trying to silence Basil. He wants to bury this place too. A cutscene then plays where he sits on a pair of red hands, almost like a throne, like he's won. Part 8. Completing the Reversal. It cuts back to the real world in Jer's room. The level of sheer relief here returning to the real world is unparalleled by any other real world to dream world transition in this game. This place, here with Kel and Hiro, feels so much safer, so much more welcoming. The real world and dream world have officially completely switched places in this respect. Jer left his house, put in some effort into his real life, and in doing so, he accomplished this. But he still hasn't faced his truth, and he won't be truly okay until he does this, regardless of which world he occupies. No matter the progress around him, something still must be addressed within him. This is shown visually when Jer looks into the mirror and sees the creature version of Marie behind him. Exploring the house, you're able to go into the piano room and Marie is playing there. There are no red lights, she's not a twisted version of herself, she's just sitting there and playing the piano with the moonlight shining on her. She talks about what I had inferred earlier, how Jer was excited at first about the violin, but it became too much for him. She mentions she may have pushed him too hard. This addition to the formula of why it can be hard to quit things is a big one. If someone you love wants you to do it, the pressure is compounded immensely. She said she just wanted it to be perfect, implying Jer was struggling to keep up with her as a musician. She says they never got to play at the last recital. Then Hiro knocks on the door and the room returns to normal. He says he thought he heard music, then starts talking about how much he misses Marie, and says he doesn't know why she chose to leave them the way she did, directly referencing a suicide, and confirming what many, and myself, probably already assumed. They were mourning a suicide, and that's why Hiro grieved the way he did. Following this, you go back to bed. You don't return to the dream world, though, just sleep right until morning, waking up to having Hiro clean the house like Jer was supposed to and making them breakfast. As they eat, they hear someone at the door. It's Aubrey's friend Kim, who's worried that Aubrey isn't answering her door at all and wants to know if it's their fault. Kel's immediate response is anger that he's being accused, but then Hiro steps in as a mediating force once again and says they should check on her. He went on to say that he still cares about Aubrey despite how she's changed, and he believes she still cares about him too. I started to get the feeling Hiro might be able to pull this group back together, like there was some hope. If anyone could serve as a middleman to get Aubrey and Kel to talk to each other, it was him. They go to her house and all of her new friends are outside, again giving them more depth than just the bullies. They really do care about Aubrey, and that's clear from their willingness to wait for her like this when she's not responding to anything. The door turns out to be unlocked, so you just go inside and head to Aubrey's room on the 3rd floor. The house is an absolute mess as you pass through, indicating she nor her parent have cleaned anything in ages. When you get to her, she's upset you're in her room, which makes sense because you've broken into her house and then her room. Hiro asks about what happened the day before, and she says she pushed Basil into the lake by accident. She just meant to push him away. The player will be inclined to believe her given her reaction directly after doing it. Kel and Aubrey then proceed to fight about the same things they have up to this point. Kel is upset she's been pushing Basil around and taking his stuff, and Aubrey counters by saying he's been demonizing her without knowing the whole story. Hiro points out how many times Aubrey and Kel have argued and then made up before and doesn't see why this time has to be any different. Then he notices the missing photos of Marie from the photo album. Aubrey says they're all she has left of Marie, and that's why she took them. Kel reveals that he and Jer are garbage pickers who took the rest of the photos out of the trash, and they agree to put all the photos together. The friends are back together, and the photo album is too. You then find the places the missing photos must go as a group. The 4 characters that had been together the entire time in the dream world were now together in the real world. After putting the Marie photos back in their proper locations, you look through the complete photo album, which now contains many photos of Marie with the group, some of them acknowledging directly Hiro and Marie as a couple. This game has a habit of strongly implying something for a long time before subtly telling you outright, but this is again a strategic placing of when we can look through the photo album and allows the group to see the memories they shared with Marie Marie before we find out the truth. This is significant given the truth is all but guaranteed to have something to do with Marie given everything we've seen up to this point. So allowing us to have more context and see such happy memories of her right beforehand is going to increase the impact of whatever it is. Among these pictures is one that points out Marie hasn't been home much because she is taking classes to prepare for college. And in this one, Basil points out how close he and Jer are getting. There's also one of Marie practicing for the recital with Jer that never happened, likely not long before her death. There's also one of her being embarrassed about making a mistake, hammering home that image of her being a perfectionist we got from her earlier. And finally, a heartbreaking one of them practicing for the recital together. As you can see at the end of looking through, there is still one photo missing. Nonetheless, looking through these as a group has done a lot to bring Aubrey back in, and there's no longer any real remnants of the animosity between Kel and Aubrey from just minutes prior. Hero calmly convinces Aubrey to apologize to Basil, and they head off in his direction. It says a lot about Hero's character when you see how quickly his presence can just bring everyone together. Things were fractured for a long time in his absence, and you can see why Jer's subconscious version of him in the dream world is portrayed as a mediating, charming healer as well. They leave Aubrey's house, and it's interesting how no music plays as they walk through the trash-ridden home to the door. There's cheerful music in her room, then nothing as soon as you step out of it until you get outside, where it returns to another cheerful melody. You also can't talk with whatever parent figure is in her living room as they are closed off by trash. In fact, they don't acknowledge you or Aubrey at all. For these reasons, I get the feeling her home life was rough in some way, especially considering it was pointed out none of them have ever hung out at her house. Plus, she seemed to feel the most abandoned when the group stopped talking after Marie's death, because she had no one at home she could reliably talk to. It wasn't as bad for the other kids in that respect because they had family to fall back on, but Aubrey felt genuinely alone, and then her new group of friends didn't know the situation like her old ones did. She felt less comfortable talking to them. Like I said earlier, this game is great at communicating things subtly. None of this was ever said outright, but it was strongly implied to the player. Aubrey talks to her worried friends outside the house and promises she will hang out tomorrow. Then you continue on your way. When you arrive at Basil's house, his caretaker informs you that he is visiting his grandma in the hospital. The kids decide to hang out for the day and go back later. I also turned the game off to do something else at this point, and when I came back to it, the main menu had changed, now featuring a red background and screeching note, switching from Jer to Omori when I hit the continue button, then quickly jumping back to the cheery music that was playing when I left off. Omori is trying to take control now that Jer is so close to the truth. If Jer reaches the truth, he'll have no need for repressing these memories and subsequently no need for Omori. It's an interesting choice to portray the repression as a separate entity like this, one that becomes more and more separate as Jer progresses. At first, Omori and Jer seem to almost be one and the same. Omori was just the Jer that exists while he sleeps, but Omori does not serve Jer's best interest. He is ultimately working against his happiness and passing it off as some form of protection. Splitting them into two separate beings makes this much clearer to the player. Sometimes our coping mechanisms hurt us, and they feel as if they've taken on a life of their own. When we reach a healthier way of doing things, they feel like old enemies, barring us from getting better in hindsight. The kids go back to Kel and Hero's house, and there's a charming little part where Hero becomes terrified, and Kel immediately knows it's because of a spider and kills it for him. Hero won't calm down until he sees it's dead. I can definitely relate to this, but it's also a funny scene given how in control Hero typically is, and I am not. That's the part I can't relate to. But this all is starting to have a feel much closer to the dream world. The friends are back together, as is the humor. And the humor here is interesting to me, because as depressed and quiet as Jer is, he constructed the dream world, which has some really funny moments. They are clearly partially based on real life, but some are fantastical in nature and must have just come from him. Jer is funny, and so is the character. Unsubscribe. There is a personality buried under all of this emotional pain. His whole affect takes on a different and much more tragic meaning when you realize this. He isn't like this, and it isn't him. I've used humor as a coping mechanism and, honestly, a survival mechanism most of my life. I was bullied in middle school and early high school and got out of it through being funnier than my bullies, which wasn't too difficult to do as they were fucking stupid. I became super self-deprecating. I beat them to the punch. Eventually, I became pretty well liked because of this and developed it as a skill. I even did stand-up comedy for 5 years, which is like being your own bully publicly. And this coping mechanism had massive drawbacks, but we'll talk about those more in another video if it comes up. At my lowest, though, even my humor would disappear. Something so integral to me at this point in my life. I just stopped joking. Everything feels like a massive task, even things that had once been second nature for me. The absence of my humor is a clear-cut sign that I am not okay. So realizing this about Jer, a kid who crawled into the box for his present and just stayed there, which is brilliant comedy, was really upsetting. I saw myself in it. The next place they head to is the old treehouse at Jer's where they used to hang out. They get to the backyard and see a stump. Their dialogue implies this is where Marie killed herself, presumably by hanging, and the tree had to be chopped down. This is common in suicides, destroying the place where it happened if possible. When you're traumatized, certain things can instantly trigger that trauma, and having those things be in the place where you live seems absolutely torturous. There is no other recourse in many cases but to get rid of it. This stump though, this stump is in the dream world as well. One of the first things I mentioned in the video, actually. There's a rainbow stump the kids emerge from at the beginning of each day, essentially housing the treehouse underneath it. It's attempting to compensate. The dream world in many ways is like the opposite of the real world. There's a stump in the real world that brings Jer a great deal of pain. So there's one in the dream world where great memories continue to take place. One right next to his safe place. White space. It is the photo negative of reality. At first, the aspects of the dream world that we found out came from the real world were all relatively innocent, like certain characters being from comic books. But as the game progressed, they got darker, learning why Marie was the save point, confined to the picnic basket, and now this. The kids discuss what was going on with each of them the day Marie died, concluding with the fact that Jer and Marie's recital was that night. At least they were grieving together now. They then continue into the woods and into the treehouse. The reminiscing here feels unavoidably bittersweet because of what lay on the path to it. The music reflects that. There is still a happy warmth despite this, though. You can really feel the memories that took place here as the music plays and the kids talk about each part of it. While searching around, Jer finds what appears to be the missing picture in the photo album. Attached to it, the key for the toy box, and the image we saw before with "Don't forget it's in the toy box" on it. It is unclear who left this for him. You show the others the picture on the front of the group cheerily going into the treehouse, and then add it to the photo album, completing it. You have another chance to look through it, and the treehouse photo caption implies it was taken the summer of building it, presumably freshly finished. All that work put into a treehouse that would soon be abandoned by those who built it for so long. Shortly after this, Aubrey suddenly rushes out of the treehouse. The friends find her putting a pinwheel on the stump. She expresses that the feeling of her friends pushing her away was on some level her pushing them away. She reveals that the reason she bullied Basil is because she found out that he had blacked out the pictures in the photo album with marker. She hastily judged him, without even considering this might be how he was coping, however destructive it may be. She feels terrible for how bad she treated him, and worse, how bad she got all of her new friends to treat him as well. Aubrey concludes that pushing away her real-life friends was actually worse than blacking out photographs, which is a process that seemed to have been reversible. The rift she caused proved itself much more difficult to wipe away. Kel and Hero then forgive Aubrey and take responsibility for their part in not being there. They all cope differently, which is natural. The mistake they made was coping alone. They go in for a group hug, resembling the group you see when looking in the mirror in the dream world for the first time in the real world. And now it's time to go apologize to Basil. But when you arrive, Polly informs you that he rushed right to his room when he got home and won't talk to her at all. The kids knock on the door and Aubrey even apologizes to him, but still no response. Hero says, "Last time we made the mistake of leaving each other when we needed each other most. This time, we'll stay together." These words will echo into the rest of the game. Hero is offering unconditional love and forgiveness to his friends when he says this. Whatever Jer may be hiding deep down, he is safest in expressing it now. The group has just seen the error in how they handled the tragedy, and they don't want to repeat it. They all decided to spend the night at Basil's and set up to sleep in the living room. Before they fall asleep, they promise to be friends forever. Part 9. The Truth. A short cinematic of Basil plays. He asks forgiveness of his best friend. Then, for the first time, Jer enters white space separate from Omori. You destroy the black light bulb that hangs from the ceiling and the screen sinks to darkness. A fight with something begins. It keeps dragging Jer into the shadows and forcing him to face the fears he has up to this point, using each skill he learned to combat them. After all three, there is still a blurry figure to face. When the blur fades, it appears to be Marie hanging. You have no choice but to use Persist, which will ensure you hang on to 1 health, no matter how damaging the next attack might be. In a sense, you do not succumb. And this is necessary as each attack drains all of your health, and it remains necessary until Calm Down becomes an option. After studying your heartbeat, Jared can learn to overcome. Using this ends the battle. Jared has officially broken down the barrier to the truth. Fear was blocking him from it. You arrive at a path with some photos on it leading up to Basil. He tells Jared to stay strong when he sees the truth and gives you a photo album that will show what happened. Entering the tree beside him results in going into Jared's living room. It seems to be the night of Marie's death. Jared's mom is on the couch and says she couldn't lose her only son, too. It's time to start piecing together this photo album. It takes you through the different parts of the night, each of which contain more photos. Starting with the hospital, then you go to the staircase. The one Jared feared so much at the beginning of the game. The first fear to overcome. There is a picture of Marie at the bottom of the stairs, after having seen that same thing when arriving at the stairs. Next is the stage where the recital was supposed to take place. Here there are many more photos. Each of them being picked up causes an image of the hand that grabbed you on the stairs to lose another finger. Next is a black space looking room, perhaps backstage, then back to a room that appears to lead to the backyard. At this point, there are 2 things that are clear. Jared and Marie got into a fight that night, and Jared pushed her down the stairs. And this was not something I wanted to believe. We had gone so long in this game believing it was a suicide along with everyone else. By the end of the album, the story comes more into focus. Jared's violin is broken at the bottom of the stairs. This was presumably done by him out of frustration, not being able to measure up to Marie, holding her back. She had high standards for his violin playing. He must have smashed his violin, then got into a fight with Marie as this was the night of her performance. During the fight, as siblings often do, he pushed her. He pushed her down the stairs. It is clear from the photos he didn't want this to happen. It is clear from the photos he is absolutely devastated, curled up and unsure what to do next. Next, Basil can be seen opening the sliding door to go to the backyard. He wants to keep Jared out of trouble. This must seem like the only way to him. Basil makes this look like a suicide. This is why he's begging Jared's forgiveness. This is why they share that trauma. This is why Basil needs him to acknowledge what happened for them to make it out. This is why the game is the way it is. Why it is so unsettling, constantly seeing something. The something being the outline of Marie hanging that Jared saw as they left. It's burned into his head, but the features stay vague as he suppresses that night. This game has been hinting at this truth constantly, from Omori's trip attack, this tree with something by it, the one with Basil swinging on it. The truth was trying to drill its way into Jared's consciousness. What happened and what they did were horrible things. That's why they're tortured. But how much judgment can we really even pass as we suffer along with them while we play? When we watched Aubrey push Basil into a lake and accepted it as an accident, the only difference there is that Basil lived. This part is excruciating. Jared wakes up. Part 10. The importance of trying. Here are where the different endings diverge. But before we talk about those, we have to talk about the hikikomori route. Hikikomori is a Japanese word defined as a form of severe social withdrawal that has been frequently described in Japan and is characterized by adolescents and young adults who become recluses in their parents' homes, unable to work or go to school for months or years. To explain how to get to this route, we have to rewind all the way back to here, when Kel first knocks on the door. If you don't open it, Jared will never leave the house for the entirety of the game. He will never experience all of this time with his friends, seeing Aubrey and Kel make up, seeing how his friends have grown and changed, and most importantly, he'll never have the things in the real world improve. He spends his days doing chores on this route and his nights in the dream world. There are other changes as well, like changes to the dream world, and you're locked out of 2 endings. Within this route, on the last day, the dream world basically resets and can be fully explored. There is so much to find, and data miners have found a huge amount buried in the code for this part. Given the already really long runtime of this video though, and the fact that much of it doesn't further my points, I will be skipping over most of it. What I will say is it is possible to reach a blacker space in this route, a new black space full of new rooms. This is due to Jared's reality never getting better. His sleep world has even more to repress, more horrifying things it's hidden. If you want to learn more more about this, though, visit the Google Doc in the description. Those guys have put so much effort in, and it is so impressive what they were able to find. There are 2 endings available from this route because you never go to Basil's. They're considered neutral endings, but I think they're a lot darker than that. Both can also be achieved by leaving Basil's on the final night and sleeping at your own house. One involves Jer going to bed on the last night after having picked up the knife from the kitchen. When Omori stabs himself in white space, Jer stabs and kills himself in the real world. The other is the same, except you don't pick up the knife before going to bed. Jer goes to his mom's car as it is moving day, and something follows him to the car and subsequently to wherever they are moving. When the credits roll for each of these endings, they are shown in the game's haunting font, used by Shadow Basil or Basil when he is particularly upset. These endings represent the ultimate giving up. After being confronted with the truth, Jer cannot handle what he saw. Jer is both locked out of a potential better ending through physically not being where he needs to be to make something else occur, and because he never got the support of his friends to be in that location in the first place. Never got that moment when Hiro says, "Last time we made the mistake of leaving each other when we needed each other most. This time we'll stay together." He never really gave himself a chance. Either Omori was able to kill him through pure power of persuasion, or something continues to follow and torture him, and the cycle continues. As for the other 2 endings, they begin with Jer waking up in the middle of the night and going to Basil's room. You are given a prompt asking if you want to save Basil. After entering, he seems glad you came, although in a very manic, unstable way, and echoes what Jer must have been feeling internally, saying that he couldn't have pushed Marie that night. He's a good person, he wouldn't do that. He then becomes hostile as he realizes Jer is leaving him tomorrow. He begins to reveal his something is different from Jer's. It's not Marie. It's Jer himself. He says something pushed Marie, something ruined the photos, implying that was also Jer and Basil took the fall for it. He doesn't want Jer to be in trouble. He doesn't want something's actions pinned on Jer, but Jer is something. Basil attacks Jer, believing he is saving him from something as they are one and the same. The 2 fight in a much more aggressive fashion than the school fights that have taken place up to this point. You can't use any of your passive moves like Calm Down that you've relied upon so heavily up to this point. None of them work. You have to fight back. Basil and Jer really injure each other. As you fight, Basil heartbreakingly asks you if you hate him, begging you to stop. But there is no other choice. Short of turning the game off, you have to attack. You have to fight back as he attacks you. At the bottom of the screen where the power for the follow-up attacks in the dream world used to be is a heart rate monitor. When it reaches 10, it begins to read, "Everything is going to be okay." A cutscene is shown of Jer being emotionally tortured before cutting back to the fight where the heart rate monitor is going berserk. The screen is going insane, reflecting the chaos going on in Jer's head right now. They fight with everything they have left, and then everything goes black. You hear sirens. You wake up in Fairway Town. Going north results in this message. Your acknowledgement of the truth has come at great cost, but it is not too late for redemption. Fortunately, you still know the way back home. That's where I head next. Basil is waiting outside. He apologizes and says they have to trust that their friends will forgive them. He points out that bottling up all this stuff is impossible. It will always escape somehow. He encourages you, goes to leave, then comes back and hugs you. You enter the house and it's finally time to use the key for the toy box. Marie is playing the piano when you go in, and she wants Jer to forgive himself. She acknowledges it as a mistake, as something unfortunate, rather than something Jer should be judged for. This is a useful reframing, shifting the blame to circumstance and acknowledging this was not intentional. Taking responsibility and being empathetic and understanding of yourself are both vital parts of coping with guilt and preventing it from turning into shame as it has with Jer. Shame is all-encompassing. I'm a bad person. Versus guilt, where you acknowledge you've done a bad thing and the circumstances around it. The truth is, guilt is a huge signifier that you aren't a bad person. Jer continues to the toy box. Inside is the shattered violin on a pile of what is presumably the sheet music from the day of the recital. Broken and locked away all this time, just like Jer. On the music is drops of blood, and Marie's hair is in the strings. A disturbing microcosm of the events that took place on the stairs that night. You can now also examine the piano. The word Omori is etched into it, presumably the brand. This is the namesake for the character, along with the obvious reference to Hikikomori. Leaving the house now leads to a long stretch of road on a rainy day. As you walk down, there are spotlights to walk into, and they bring Jer to different places in his memories. In the treehouse, on the beach, and in various other locations. Remembering each time heals a part of the violin. Every part of this post-basal fight segment is meant to build Jer back up. He has taken the broken and hidden violin out and mending it through the same means that he might be mended, through his loved ones that are finally back together. The final memory visited is the day Jer got his violin. That day, in that actual moment, he was happy. Looking back on memories through the filter of all the time between you and them can seriously taint happy memories like this. You end up disregarding the moment because of the context of what happens next, letting a great moment be damaged by the bad ones. But Jer has to learn to separate that. He has to learn to have these happy memories and acknowledge the bad things that came later without the two getting muddled, just as we all do with the death of a loved one. Eventually, every memory of them is no longer painful, no longer intrinsically tied with the thought of their death. You can just remember how you felt in that moment with them, and that is true acceptance. At the very end, this dialogue box shows how much Jer did not want to disappoint them. He wanted to play well, for his friends and for Marie. After this, Jer steps into the location of his recital. Aubrey, Hiro, and Kel are all there to greet him, to tell them how he's helped them and how they love him. Sometimes feeling shame can lead you to completely forget that you've done good too. When you think you're a bad person, you discount all the evidence to the contrary. This is here specifically to dispute that thought. After speaking with your friends, something small but very important happens. When you try to walk away from the stage, Jer shakes his head and will not do so. Every other time Jer has shook his head and refused to go somewhere, it was out of fear. Here, though, it was out of determination. Jer takes the stage and plays the recital piece perfectly. At the end, though, it's time to face Omori. To really make it out, Jer must defeat his suppression. Omori stands directly in the way of his happiness. Jer has some new musically named skills to help him with more offensive moves in the encounter, but it is clear Omori is stronger and this will be a difficult fight. The sound of Jer's knife is flimsy. You can feel its lack of power here. After doing enough damage, Omori Did Not Succumb will appear on the screen and the fight will continue. This move that had saved you in countless moments up until now was now prolonging a painful one. Jer must reclaim it for himself. Cherish can be used at those moments to remember something a friend said that can give Jer strength and heal. However, Omori can then erase the enemy and do a sizable chunk of damage. Omori taunts him as it progresses, in that haunting font, telling him he's caused so much suffering, then telling him his friends won't forgive him, they'll abandon him. Omori is every toxic word Jer has ever said to himself, but he's doing everything he can to combat this. Every time you hit Cherish, another memory of a friend countering the narrative Omori is spinning comes out. It may seem as if all this great stuff leading up to this point would have made this easy for Jer. He's been through all the happy memories, faced the truth, and learned that his friends will be there for him. But all of this was necessary to combat this, though potentially not sufficient. This stuff has been festering for years. The negative thoughts that have become second nature are so much easier to think. They may not be more accurate, but Jer has fed them so much over the years that they have become more powerful regardless. You are descending deeper as you go. The background of the fight gets more disturbing, Omori's words get more horrible, but you can still cherish. You can still hear Hiro say, "We won't make the mistake of abandoning each other again." The fight is so difficult though. I failed multiple times and had to restart and keep reliving it. Omori tells him he's useless, he's sick, he's better off dead. Anyone who's been suicidal has had an Omori in their head, telling them these things. If left uncountered, they are taken as fact, that you are bad, that you should die. But I kept hitting retry. I am no stranger to these thoughts, and I am no stranger to beating them. Part 11. I Did Not Succumb. Way back at the beginning of this video, I talked about November 2018, how down I was. And during that time, I had these thoughts that I was worthless, that I should just die. And it wasn't the first time I had them, not even close. But every time before this one, I took those thoughts as absolute fact. And I formulated ways to kill myself. I Googled what it would take, how many pills, what was a painless way to do it. Poured a glass of water, got the pills ready, and I got lucky. I spent time in the psych ward, I was put on suicide watch, and those moments in my life were fucking horrendous, but I lived. And I don't know if what I wanted was really death, or something more vague, a release from suffering. Not to stop feeling, but to stop feeling this. I know I would gladly have taken getting better over death. But in my lowest moments, I had no hope I would get better. What brought me there was my own shit brain chemistry, my trauma, my self-medicating, that preference for snorting a pill over the long-term relief of treatment. But eventually something in me switched. I was able to recognize my toxicity towards myself as a result of seeing my toxicity towards others. I was really hurting those around me through my using and my behavior as a result of my using. And I was ground zero for all that pain. I went to rehab. I didn't just get sober though. I went to therapy, started going to AA meetings, saw a psychiatrist, and through a plethora of non-habit forming medications and a horrible gauntlet of trial and error, found ones that worked for me. But before the final one, the final piece in the puzzle that mostly holds me together today, a mood stabilizer, November 2018 happened, and those horrible things entered my head once again. But this time was different. Not because of the thoughts themselves, but because of my assessment of their truth value. There was, on some level, part of me that believed it, but there was now a level of me that didn't. It was as if there was a flame in me before that went out, that stayed lit this time. A flame that knew we had been through horrible things before and came out the other side, that we had been 10 feet deep and saw the surface again. And through all of this, all these horrible feelings, not showering, not going outside, not seeing the sunlight, not eating, not seeing my family, not seeing my friends, that flame stayed lit. A part of me that believed in myself when the rest of me didn't. I did not succumb, but others I knew weren't so lucky. And it isn't a matter of strength, they absolutely were not weak. It's a matter of holding on to hope, knowing that things can get better and that you can make that happen, and those two things are facts no matter who you are. But it can be so hard to see that in the moment when everything is so close up. You're so far away from the big picture. When I think about the different endings of this game and which ones my uncles that I lost to suicide fall into, it breaks my heart. The most recent one I was completely blindsided by. I never even thought it was a possibility, but that's what's so dangerous. He was holding it in. He was building his own Omori. One that would not go on to be properly challenged. And an Omori can come from anything. It doesn't have to be an event like this. It's different for everyone. But whether or not we succumb depends on whether or not we find our way to fighting it, and whether or not we hold on when we get there. If at any point in this fight you hit no when asked to retry, Jer will wake up in the hospital, go to the balcony, and jump. He plunges to his death as the credits scroll by. A song plays that almost starts happy, but becomes more and more unsettling as time passes, highlighting the nature of what is happening. Jer is released from suffering, but at the cost of everything. He has executed a checkmate on these terrible feelings, but also on all feelings. In some ways, this feels like the most tragic ending. He made it so far and looked through so many happy memories for it to end in this. Luckily, this isn't the happy ending. And moreover, it's not the real one. Part 12. The true ending. If you continue on in the fight, Omori keeps repeating the phrase, "It would be better to just die." It is very hard to find a turn to attack and not just heal. Omori often does a lot of damage. It becomes an exercise in endurance. It honestly feels hopeless at times, like you'll never be able to attack again. There are long stretches where you can't afford to use a turn to attack. It feels as if it will go on forever, but eventually you can chip away at him and you can make it to the last phase. At this point, Omori starts saying, "You killed Marie 3. She loved you and you killed her. Then Hero loved her and you killed her, painfully cycling through all the friends until arriving at you loved her and you killed her. This one repeated over and over again. You loved her and you killed her. You loved her and you killed her. You loved her and you killed her. Self-forgiveness is the hardest kind and subsequently the final challenge here. The part that is saved for last and the most emphasized. At this point, you cannot kill Omori. You can't heal and he beats you. His final words, you should just die. But you wake up in the hospital with another prompt asking you if you want to continue. You select yes. Omori never really could kill Jare. He could only convince Jare to do it himself. In persevering and not giving up, Jare won. A cutscene plays of Jare standing up with his violin. A new prompt appears in the fight. Play. Clicking it ends the fight immediately. Another cutscene plays, all happy memories of Jare growing up. Omori finally disappears. This is the ultimate demonstration of the importance of feeling. A theme that began much more subtly in the beginning and then grew throughout the entirety of this game, creeping into every aspect of it. At the beginning, I talked about how all emotions are important in some way, and to escape this, Jare had to feel every single one. You wake up in the hospital surrounded by loving get well soon notes and gifts from all the people you've encountered in Fairway Town. Looking in the mirror here will reveal no something behind you. You exit the room seeing your dream world friends in Shadow Basil. You go to Basil's room, enter, and see all of Jare's friends. Then Jare speaks his first words on his own through the entirety of the game. I have to tell you something. This is made so much more impactful by the fact that he had been a silent protagonist up to this point. Silent protagonists are designed so that you project yourself onto the character. And here, this was genius. You had no room for judgment when the truth was revealed. It was too late. You had already connected yourself to this character, likely even named them after you. And something all of us and myself throughout the entirety of this video do is use I and the character interchangeably. I'm low on health. I opened the door. You become one and the same. You felt what they felt, as excruciating as it was. And in the end, it resulted in one of the most impactful games I will ever play. A game so well done, I'm hesitant to recommend it to anyone. That's the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. There's a huge amount to this game, so if I missed something or got a detail wrong, please let me know down in the comments. I actually do want to hear about it. Also, if you've watched this far, I hope you liked it. I mean, I hope you didn't have a horrible time. Like, I don't know why you'd watch this far if you hated it. There's a lot of options. But if you did, please like the video, please subscribe, please click the notification bell. You know the list of stuff. I put more energy into this video than any one thing in my entire life up to this point. So any support would be greatly appreciated. I want to make videos like this for a living, and any help in doing that would be so amazing. I'd be so grateful. Love you all, and please get help if you need it.